Tonight, we will explore the quiet path of seeing and how our inner world shapes the reflections we find outside. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply allow your body to settle. Feel the gentle support beneath you. Release any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, in your jaw, in your mind. This moment is enough. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air moving softly in and out, a quiet rhythm beginning. In a temple renowned for its bronze mirrors, nestled deep in a valley where the river flowed slow and calm, its waters a ribbon of silver threading through ancient emerald hills. This was a place where time itself seemed to slow, where the very air hummed with a quiet reverence. The temple, built of dark, smooth wood and stone, rose with an unassuming grace, its eaves curving gently towards the sky like the wings of a watchful heron. Here, the scent of damp earth often mingled with the subtle fragrance of pine carried on the breeze, sometimes touched by the distant whisper of wood smoke, or the sweet, lingering perfume of burning incense from inner shrines. It was a world painted in muted, natural tones. The deep greens of forests that had stood for centuries, the soft grays of moss clinging to venerable stones, the warm, rich browns of polished wood that absorbed the light, and the occasional, breathtaking flash of burnished bronze that caught the sun. In these hallowed halls, where sunlight filtered through high, narrow windows, casting long, dancing dust motes into the quiet air, there lived a young apprentice named Kai. He was a man in his late 20s, slender and earnest, his dark hair usually tied back simply from a face that, even in repose, held a certain focused intensity. His hands, though still young, were already calloused and practiced, bearing the quiet marks of years spent in diligent craft. He wore simple robes of undyed linen, or sometimes a muted indigo, their fabric often dusted with the fine, almost invisible powder of polishing compounds. Kai's work was the polishing of the temple's revered bronze mirrors, the great discs that had reflected generations of monks, pilgrims, and the slow, unfolding seasons. Each mirror was a testament to ancient skill, a circular portal meant to capture and return the world with perfect fidelity. Kai approached his task with unwavering dedication, his movements precise, his focus absolute. He would take a soft cloth, specially woven, and apply the polishing paste with a steady rhythmic pressure, working in slow, concentric circles. The sound was a soft, almost imperceptible shh, a breath against the metal, a whisper of devotion. He would work until the surface shimmered, until it took on a flawless liquid gleam, capable of reflecting the intricate carvings of the temple walls, the quiet passing of a cloud, or the flickering flame of an oil lamp with exquisite clarity. He was a master of the external, of the visible, of bringing forth an undeniable perfection from the bronze. Yet, something troubled Kai, a persistent, quiet ache that settled deep behind his observant eyes. For all his skill, for all the undeniable perfection he wrought upon the bronze, when he looked into the mirrors he had so meticulously prepared, he could never see his own true nature clearly. His own reflection, to his eyes, was always just slightly distorted, a subtle blur around the edges, a shadow of uncertainty in his gaze that he could not quite place. It was not a flaw in the mirror, he was sure of that, for he could see the intricate patterns of the temple, the delicate veins of a leaf held before it, the precise curve of a distant roof tile with absolute sharpness. But his own face, his own form, it was as if a veil, invisible to others, lay specifically over him. He believed something was fundamentally wrong with his vision, or perhaps with his technique, a secret imperfection hidden in his own hands, a failing in his own perception that only manifested when confronting himself. This quiet desperation, this persistent blur, fueled a growing anxiety within him. He would polish with increasing fervor, convinced that if he just worked harder, if he just applied himself with more diligence, if he just found the right angle, the perfect compound, the flaw would vanish. He would spend hours, sometimes well past the soft golden glow of morning, through the gentle hush of afternoon, and into the deep, calming twilight, his lamp casting long shadows, his breath misting faintly in the cooler air, trying to chase away that elusive distortion. His soft, thoughtful voice, when he spoke to himself in those quiet moments, often carried an underlying current of frustration, a murmur of confusion that only the silent stones of the temple heard. He was a seeker, earnest and dedicated, but one who looked outward, always outward, believing the solution must lie in the bronze, in the cloth, in the external world he worked so hard to perfect. It was in these quiet moments, amidst the rhythmic shh of Kai's relentless polishing, that another presence moved through the ancient halls. This was Aya, the old cleaning woman of the temple. She was perhaps in her late 60s, or even her early 70s, her face a map of gentle kindness, weathered by time and etched with a profound peace. Her posture was slightly stooped, a curve that spoke of long years of humble service, but her movements were economical and fluid, imbued with a quiet dignity that belied her age. Her hair, a soft, cloud-like white, was often tied in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, sometimes a stray wisp framing her wise, observant eyes. She wore plain, dark robes, well worn and mended, that seemed to blend seamlessly into the shadows and deep browns of the temple's ancient wood, making her presence almost imperceptible, like a soft breath of air. Aya moved through the temple with a gentle unhurriedness, her sandaled feet making no sound on the polished floors. Her broom, its straw bristles worn smooth from years of quiet sweeping, would whisper across the stones, a soft, rhythmic companion to Kai's own diligent work. She observed much, this old woman. She saw the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, the way the light shifted with the hours, the subtle changes in the patterns of moss on the courtyard stones. And she saw Kai. She saw his earnest dedication, yes, but more keenly. She saw the subtle tension in his shoulders, the faint furrow in his brow, the flicker of anxiety in his quiet eyes, even as he worked to bring forth perfection. She watched his frantic efforts, his increasing fervor with quiet understanding, a knowing compassion that never wavered. Her gaze was soft, encompassing, seeing beyond the surface of his activity to the heart of his struggle, yet never judging. One quiet afternoon, as Kai, bathed in the soft golden light filtering through a high window, was once again bent over a particularly large bronze mirror, his cloth moving with an almost desperate speed, Aya paused nearby. She did not speak loudly, her voice a soft murmur, like the rustle of dry leaves, always calm and patient. It was a voice that invited thought, not immediate reply. She rested her broom gently against a pillar, its worn handle smooth beneath her hand. Kai continued his work, not immediately noticing her presence, so absorbed was he in his task. He frowned slightly, tilting his head, trying to catch his own image, trying to discern the elusive blur that still clung to his reflection. Aya watched him for a long moment, her wise eyes seeing past the bronze, past the frantic hands, to the seeking heart within. Then her soft voice broke the rhythmic silence, a whisper barely louder than the breeze through the eaves, yet it seemed to settle upon Kai's ears with the weight of ancient stone, with the clarity of a distant temple bell. She spoke not to admonish, nor to instruct in the usual way, but to offer a seed of a different kind of seeing, a gentle question that would begin to unearth the truth from within. "You polish the mirror," Aya murmured, her gaze steady. "But perhaps you forget to clean the eyes that look." Kai paused, his hand still on the mirror's surface, his breath held. He slowly straightened, turning to face her, a flicker of surprise, then confusion in his eyes. Aya continued, her voice soft, yet resonating with an unspoken depth. "The dust, young Kai, is not on the bronze. The dust is on your seeing itself." The words hung in the quiet air, settling around Kai like the fine polishing dust. Yet unlike the dust, these words felt heavy, full of a strange new weight. He looked from Aya's calm, knowing face to the shimmering, perfectly polished mirror, then back to Aya. The flaw was not in the mirror, not in his technique, but in his seeing. It was a thought that had never occurred to him. So convinced was he that all problems were external, solvable through greater effort or more refined technique. He was a seeker, yes, but he had always looked outward, believing the answer lay in the world he could touch, shape, and perfect. Now, Aya's words had gently, almost imperceptibly, turned his gaze not to the surface of the mirror, but towards the very act of looking. And in that moment, a quiet shift began, a subtle turning of the path, away from the frantic pursuit of external solutions and towards a profound inner awakening, though Kai, in his earnest seeking, did not yet know it. The quiet shift had begun, though Kai, in his earnest seeking, did not yet know it. He stood, suspended between Aya's profound, gentle words and the flawless, gleaming surface of the bronze mirror before him. The dust, she had said, was not on the bronze, but on his seeing itself. It was a notion that felt both utterly foreign and strangely resonant, like a forgotten melody stirring in the deepest chambers of his memory. He had always believed that problems, like the dullness on a mirror, were external, tangible, and solvable with diligent effort, but to suggest the flaw lay within, not in the object of his gaze, but in the very act of gazing. This was a puzzle of a different order, one his practiced hands and focused mind were ill-equipped to solve. For days, Aya's words continued to echo in the quiet spaces of the temple, a persistent, soft murmur in Kai's thoughts. "Clean the eyes that look. The dust is on your seeing itself." He tried to follow her guidance in his own way, in the only way he knew how to approach a problem, with intense, focused effort. He would return to the mirrors, not with his polishing cloth, but with a renewed, almost desperate intensity in his gaze. He would stare, harder than before, at his own reflection. He would narrow his eyes, then widen them, as if physically trying to brush away an invisible film. He would tilt his head, seeking different angles, moving from side to side, hoping that a change in perspective would somehow dislodge the elusive blur, hoping the distortion would suddenly, miraculously, snap into clarity. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, as if resetting his vision, willing the internal dust to settle, to vanish. He would gaze intently at the intricate patterns of the temple walls, at the delicate veins of a leaf held before the mirror, at the precise curve of a distant roof tile, all of which still appeared with absolute sharpness. Then, he would shift his focus to his own face, his own form, watching for any change, any lifting of that subtle, frustrating veil. But the distortion persisted, a faint, unwavering blur around the edges of his own image, a shadow of uncertainty in his gaze that seemed to mock his efforts. A growing frustration began to coil within him, tight and insistent. He felt as if he stood before a locked door, holding the key, yet unable to find the mechanism to turn it. The truth, Aya suggested, was simple, not hidden in complex techniques or obscure knowledge. Yet it remained stubbornly out of reach. He was failing, he believed, to grasp a truth that should be readily apparent. This failure, unlike the challenge of a stubborn stain on bronze, was internal, and therefore far more unsettling. His soft, thoughtful voice, now often tinged with a weariness that belied his youth, would sometimes utter a quiet sigh, a sound lost in the vast, still halls. Aya, in her gentle, unhurried way, observed Kai's renewed struggle. She saw his increased tension, the slight tremor in his hands as he tried to force his eyes to see, the subtle tightening around his mouth. She saw the familiar flicker of anxiety that had returned to his quiet eyes, even more pronounced now that his usual methods had proven futile. She did not intervene immediately, but her soft gaze held an unwavering patience, a deep understanding that Kai's own efforts, though misguided, were a necessary part of his path. She knew that the seed she had planted needed time to germinate, and sometimes the soil of the mind needed to be turned over many times before it was ready to receive new growth. One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun began to filter through the high windows, painting the temple halls in long, dancing dust motes and warm, shifting shadows, Kai found himself slumped near one of the large bronze mirrors. His polishing cloth lay discarded beside him. He wasn't polishing, wasn't even staring. He was simply defeated, his head bowed, the weight of his unyielding frustration pressing down upon him. The distant murmur of the river, usually a soothing presence, now seemed to mock his restless mind. Aya, her movements as fluid and silent as a wisp of smoke, approached him. She carried her simple wooden broom, its straw bristles worn smooth from years of gentle sweeping, but she did not sweep. She simply sat down beside him on the cool, polished floor, her presence a soft, warm anchor in his sea of quiet despair. She did not speak for a long moment, allowing the deep, enveloping silence of the temple to settle around them, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the gentle rustle of leaves in the courtyard outside. Then, her voice, a soft murmur like the rustle of dry leaves, broke the silence, yet did not disturb it. "To clean the eyes, young Kai," she said, her gaze fixed on the polished bronze, "one must first allow them to rest." Kai slowly lifted his head, his eyes still clouded with confusion. "Rest?" he questioned, his voice a quiet, almost hoarse whisper. "But I must see. I must understand." Aya nodded, her white hair a soft cloud around her face. "Indeed. But how can one understand the flow of the river if one is frantically trying to catch every drop? How can one truly see the reflection if one is trying to grasp it?" She turned her kind eyes towards him, their depth holding ancient wisdom. "Simply sit, Kai. Simply be. Observe the reflections without judgment. Feel the quiet space around you. Do not seek to find, only to allow." Kai looked from her calm, patient face to the mirror. Observe without judgment. Do not seek to find. It was so contrary to everything he had ever been taught, to every instinct within him. His mind, once eager to solve, now felt burdened, heavy with the weight of his own relentless seeking. Yet there was an undeniable peace in Aya's presence, a quiet invitation that was hard to resist. Slowly, hesitantly, he allowed his body to settle, leaning back against the cool stone pillar beside him. He took a gentle breath, feeling the air moving softly in and out, trying to release the tension he still held in his shoulders, in his jaw, in his mind. He sat there for what felt like a very long time, simply looking at the mirror, trying not to look for anything. He tried to follow Aya's subtle instruction, to let go of the frantic pursuit of external solutions to his internal puzzle. At first, his mind raced, still trying to analyze, to discern the blur, to understand how to observe without judgment. But as the minutes stretched into an hour and then another, as the soft, golden glow of afternoon deepened into the calming twilight, something began to shift. He began to notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow on the mirror's surface. He saw how the last rays of the sun, filtering through the high windows, caught the edges of the intricate carvings on the temple walls, casting long, ethereal shadows that danced and stretched across the bronze. He saw how the deep greens of the ancient forests outside, reflected in the mirror, slowly transformed into muted grays and soft blues as the light faded. He noticed the soft flicker of the oil lamps being lit in distant halls, their warm glow appearing in the mirror as tiny trembling stars against the encroaching dusk. He watched without effort as the temple's form, reflected in the bronze, seemed to shift and breathe with the sun's journey across the sky. In the morning, it was sharp, clear, defined by the bright light. In the afternoon, it softened, imbued with a gentle warmth. And now, in the twilight, it became a place of mystery, of deep, calming shadows. Its familiar contours softened, almost dreamlike. The mirror was not static. It was a canvas upon which the light and shadow painted an ever-changing masterpiece. As he simply sat, simply observed, Kai began to understand that seeing might be more than just looking with his physical eyes. It was an awareness, a receptivity to the subtle dance of existence that unfolded before him, always new, always fresh. The mirror, he realized, was not meant to capture a static, unchanging image of self, a rigid, fixed identity. No, it was reflecting something far grander, far more profound. It was reflecting the dynamic nature of existence itself, the constant flow of light, shadow, and time. His own reflection, when he allowed his gaze to rest upon it without the usual frantic search for flaw, still held its subtle blur, but now it no longer triggered the same sharp anxiety. It was simply there, part of the larger, ever-changing tapestry. He was beginning to see that perhaps the mirror was not meant to show him a perfect, unchanging him, but to reflect the ceaseless interplay of all things, including himself, in all his shifting, dynamic impermanence. The dust, he now dimly perceived, was not on the bronze, nor truly on his physical eyes, but perhaps on the very expectation of what he thought he should see. And in that quiet, unforced observation, a deep, resonant peace began to gently unfurl within him, like a new leaf opening in the soft light of dawn. The soft light of dawn gave way to the full, gentle illumination of a new day. Kai awoke from a sleep more profound than any he had known in months, a stillness he hadn't realized he craved. The memory of the previous evening's quiet observation lingered, a faint, sweet aftertaste in his mind. The subtle blur in his reflection had not vanished, but his fierce resistance to it had. He felt a delicate shift within himself, a quiet widening of his awareness, as if a small, stubborn knot in his chest had finally begun to loosen. He moved through the temple halls with a new, unhurried grace, his sandaled feet making barely a whisper on the polished floors. The rhythmic shh, shh of Aya's broom, usually a comforting backdrop, now seemed to carry a deeper resonance, each stroke a testament to a quiet, ceaseless presence. He watched the dust motes dance in the sunlight, no longer seeking to clear them from his vision, but simply observing their delicate, fleeting beauty. He no longer felt the urgent pull to grasp, to fix, to force a perfect clarity. Instead, a new kind of curiosity stirred within him, a desire to simply see what unfolded around him without the filter of his own expectations. This quiet curiosity, a subtle impulse he could not name, gently drew him beyond the familiar sanctuary of the temple walls and towards the small, sleepy village nestled by the river. The air there carried different scents than the temple's blend of incense and damp earth. Here, there was the tang of freshly baked bread, the distant, earthy smell of the river, and the sweet, lingering perfume of blooming jasmine from hidden courtyards. The sounds, too, were different. The low murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of a potter's wheel, the distant splash of water as a boatman guided his craft along the slow, wide river. Yet, even in the village's gentle bustle, a quiet reverence for craft and for the rhythm of life permeated the atmosphere, a subtle harmony that resonated with the temple's own peace. He found himself drawn to a small, unassuming tea shop, its wooden facade weathered to a soft gray, its paper lanterns swaying gently in the morning breeze. The scent of roasted tea leaves, both earthy and delicately floral, wafted invitingly from within. Through the open doorway, he saw her, Yuki, the tea merchant's daughter. He knew of her reputation, even within the temple, for her family supplied some of the finest ceremonial teas. She was renowned for her exquisite knowledge, her meticulous preparation, and her unwavering dedication to the ancient art of tea. Yuki moved with an elegant precision that mirrored Kai's own diligent movements at the polishing stone. Her slender fingers, long and graceful, handled the delicate porcelain bowls and bamboo whisks with an almost ritualistic care. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face in a simple, elegant knot, revealing a brow that was often subtly furrowed, and a mouth that, despite her focused intensity, held a faint, almost imperceptible tension. She wore robes of soft, muted green, the color of young tea leaves, which seemed to emphasize her connection to her craft. Kai stood for a long time, simply observing her from a discreet distance, allowing the gentle murmur of the village sounds to wash over him. He watched as Yuki selected tea leaves from intricately carved wooden chests, her eyes scanning each delicate curl and twist with an expert's discernment. She weighed them with precise measurements, her movements economical and fluid, a master of her chosen medium. She heated the water to the exact temperature, poured it with a steady hand, and whisked the tea into a frothy, vibrant green. Each step was executed with flawless technique, a testament to years of dedicated practice, a quest for external perfection that Kai understood intimately. He watched her offer a bowl to a customer, a local weaver whose face lit up with pleasure. But when Yuki herself raised a bowl to her lips, her expression, though carefully composed, betrayed a subtle flicker of something else. A faint sigh, almost inaudible, escaped her. Her eyes, as she set the bowl down, held a familiar, distant quality, a quiet disappointment that resonated deeply within Kai. He heard snippets of conversation from other customers. "Such fine tea, Yuki-san," one exclaimed. "No one prepares it with such reverence." Another murmured, "The aroma alone is a delight." Yet, Kai saw the subtle tension around Yuki's mouth, the way her shoulders seemed to carry a weight beyond the simple act of serving tea. He learned, from the hushed whispers of the other villagers, that Yuki had traveled far and wide, seeking out rare and ancient tea ceremonies, learning from revered masters in distant lands. She had studied the history of every leaf, the philosophy behind every pour, the intricate alchemy of water and earth. Her knowledge of tea was encyclopedic, her skill undeniable. Yet despite her vast erudition, despite her flawless technique, she was perpetually dissatisfied. She found every brew, even the most exquisite, to be lacking, to be bitter somehow. Empty, she would sometimes confide to a trusted elder, a quiet sadness in her voice. She believed that somewhere, in some hidden garden or in the hands of some long-forgotten master, existed the perfect tea, a brew that would finally bring her a profound and lasting satisfaction. And so, she continued her tireless search, polishing her technique, refining her knowledge, believing that the flaw lay in the tea itself, or perhaps in the method of its preparation, or in her inability to find that elusive, ultimate leaf. As Kai watched her, a profound recognition bloomed within him, quiet yet undeniable. He saw in Yuki's diligent, yet ultimately frustrated, search a vivid reflection of his own struggle. Her precise knowledge of tea, her relentless pursuit of an external ideal, echoed his own meticulous polishing of the bronze mirrors, his own frantic efforts to force a clear image from a surface he believed to be flawed. Just as he had polished with increasing fervor, convinced the distortion was in the mirror itself or in his technique, Yuki polished her craft, refined her understanding, believing the bitterness was in the tea, or in her inability to find its ultimate essence. The problem, he now dimly perceived, was not in the tea, just as it was not in the mirror. It was not in the leaves, nor in the bronze. It was a problem of perception, manifesting in different forms, whether in the act of seeing a reflection or in the delicate art of tasting a tea. Yuki, with all her knowledge, was unable to truly taste, just as he, with all his skill, had been unable to truly see. She was seeking the perfect tea out there, somewhere beyond her present experience, just as he had sought the perfect reflection, a static image of self that would finally ease his internal disquiet. A quiet empathy stirred within Kai as he watched Yuki. He saw her earnestness, her deep commitment, and the subtle weariness that shadowed her elegant movements. He understood her struggle, for it had so recently been his own. The gentle invitation from Aya to simply sit, simply be, observe without judgment, now resonated with a broader truth. It wasn't just about mirrors. It was about the very fabric of how one engaged with the world, how one perceived and experienced. The dust, he now saw, was not merely on the bronze, nor on his eyes, but on the very expectation of what one thought one should taste, or thought one should see, a veil woven from comparison and constant seeking. And in that quiet, shared understanding, Kai felt a subtle strengthening of the fragile peace that had begun to unfurl within him, a quiet recognition that he was not alone on this path of the unseen reflection. Kai lingered by the tea shop, the morning sun now warming the weathered wood, the scent of roasted leaves a constant, gentle presence in the air. He watched Yuki, her movements as fluid as the tea she poured, her precision a silent poetry. He saw the subtle tension, still, around her mouth, even as she gracefully offered a steaming bowl to an eager customer. His own recent realization that the problem was not in the tea or the mirror, but in the expectation, still hummed within him, a quiet, nascent understanding. He felt a kinship with Yuki, a silent knowing of her tireless, frustrated quest. It was then that Aya, the old cleaning woman, paused near the tea shop, her simple wooden broom held upright, its straw bristles worn smooth from years of patient sweeping across countless temple floors. Her presence was as soft and unobtrusive as the morning mist that sometimes clung to the valley. Yet Kai always felt the subtle shift in the air when she was near. Her gaze, as always, was gentle, encompassing both Kai's thoughtful silence and Yuki's focused precision as she meticulously arranged leaves. "The tea tastes bitter, even the finest leaves," Kai murmured, almost to himself, the words escaping as if they were a shared secret with the air, a quiet echo of his own past frustrations. Yuki knows everything about tea, yet she cannot find its essence. Aya turned her kind eyes towards Kai, their depths like still pools reflecting ancient wisdom. "She knows much about the tea, yes," she said, her voice a quiet rustle, like dry leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. "But what does she know of the tasting?" Kai considered this, his brow furrowing slightly in thought. "She tastes with great care, I think. She seeks the perfect brew." Aya nodded slowly, a faint, knowing smile gracing her lips, not of amusement, but of deep understanding. "Perhaps, but when one seeks perfection, what does one find?" Kai was quiet for a moment, the question hanging in the air, resonating with a truth he had only recently begun to uncover within himself. "Only disappointment, it seems," he replied, a familiar weariness in his own voice, a memory of his own moments of despair before the bronze mirrors. "And if one were to simply taste?" Aya asked, her gaze drifting towards a small child who happily drank a simple cup of water from a chipped earthenware mug, eyes wide with wonder at the clear liquid, as if it were the most wondrous elixir. Without judgment, without comparison, without seeking something else? Her words settled upon Kai like the soft dust on the temple's ancient carvings, inviting not a frantic wipe, but a quiet observation. He watched Yuki again, her movements still elegant, still precise, but now, to Kai's newly awakened perception, infused with a subtle tension, a silent striving. He saw how she would watch a customer sip, almost as if searching their face for a judgment that would validate her own, or perhaps confirm her own unspoken dissatisfaction. Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, a woman whose robes, though clean, were patched and worn, her gray hair pulled back from a face etched with the silent stories of many seasons. She moved with a quiet dignity, her eyes holding a deep, uncomplaining stillness. She was one of the many unseen souls of the village, those who lived on the periphery, their lives woven into the fabric of the community, but rarely noticed in the bustling marketplace. She approached Yuki's tea shop, not with the hurried step of a customer, but with a patient, humble grace. "A simple cup of your everyday tea, if you please, Yuki-san," she requested, her voice soft, like pebbles tumbling gently in a stream, "to warm these old bones." Yuki paused, a momentary flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Perhaps it was the contrast between this simple request and the elaborate ceremonies she usually performed, or the stark difference from the connoisseurs who sought her most rare and expensive blends. For a breath, she hesitated, her precise movements momentarily stilled. Then, with a practiced grace, she reached for a plain ceramic pot, filled with the humble, common tea leaves, the kind that were steeped quickly and served without ceremony. She poured the tea into a sturdy, unadorned bowl, the steam rising in a thin, fragrant wisp. There was no elaborate whisking, no careful measuring of water temperature, no ritualistic movements beyond the simple act of preparing a basic, warming brew. She offered it to the woman, her expression polite, though still holding that faint, almost imperceptible tension. The homeless woman accepted the bowl with both hands, her fingers gnarled and worn. She brought it to her lips, not with the analytical sniff of a connoisseur, nor with the polite sip of a casual customer, but with a profound and unhurried reverence. Her eyes closed for a moment as the warmth permeated her hands and the fragrant steam rose to her face. Then, she took a long, slow sip. A soft sigh escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment. Her eyes opened, and a gentle light filled them, a quiet joy that seemed to emanate from the very depths of her being. She gazed into the simple tea as if it held all the universe within its steaming depths, and then looked at Yuki, a profound gratitude shining in her gaze. "Ah," she breathed, her voice a soft whisper. "This is truly the most wonderful tea. It warms me to the very heart. Thank you, Yuki-san. Thank you." She took another sip, slowly, deliberately, savoring each drop as if it were a rare nectar, as if this plain, everyday brew was the culmination of all her wanderings, the answer to all her unspoken prayers. There was no analysis in her eyes, no comparison, no judgment. There was only presence, only the pure, unburdened experience of the taste, the warmth, the simple goodness of the moment. She was simply tasting. Yuki, who had been watching with a detached politeness, felt something stir within her. Her precise movements, usually so assured, seemed to falter. She looked at the woman's face, serene and content, then down at the plain tea in the simple bowl, then back at the woman's radiant expression. The meticulous knowledge of leaves, the intricate philosophy of brewing, the tireless search for the perfect tea that had consumed her for so long, seemed to fall away, like dry leaves scattered by a sudden gust of wind. She saw the pure, unadulterated joy in the woman's eyes, a joy that came not from the rarity of the tea, nor from the skill of its preparation, but from the simple act of receiving and savoring. The woman tasted without expectation, without comparison, without searching for something more. She simply tasted what was. And in that unburdened tasting, she found an essence that Yuki, with all her vast knowledge and refined technique, had never been able to perceive. A profound realization dawned upon Yuki, quiet yet undeniable. The bitterness she had always tasted, the emptiness she had always felt, was not in the tea itself. It was in her own mind, in her relentless pursuit of an external ideal, in her constant analysis and comparison, in her inability to simply be with the present moment, to simply taste what was before her without the heavy veil of judgment and expectation. The perfect tea was not to be found in a hidden garden or an ancient scroll. It was found in the pure, unadorned act of tasting, in the simple presence of mind that allowed the tea to reveal its own truth, its own warmth, its own essence. Yuki's shoulders seemed to relax, subtly, almost imperceptibly. The faint tension around her mouth softened. She poured herself a cup of the very same everyday tea, the kind she usually dismissed, and brought it to her lips. This time, there was no analytical sniff, no critical sip. She closed her eyes, just as the homeless woman had done, and simply tasted. The tea was warm, earthy, simple, and for the first time, it was not bitter. It was simply tea, and in its simplicity, a quiet fullness bloomed within her. Kai, observing this transformation from his quiet vantage point, felt a powerful resonance deep within his own being. Yuki's journey, her epiphany, mirrored his own struggle with the bronze mirrors with startling clarity. He had polished with increasing fervor, believing the flaw was external, in the mirror itself, or in his technique. He had sought a perfect reflection, a static image of self that would finally ease his internal disquiet. But like Yuki, who had searched for the perfect tea in distant lands, he had been looking outward when the clarity he sought lay inward. His own frantic polishing, His own desire for a flawless reflection had prevented him from simply being with what was present. He had been so focused on what should be, on what he expected to see, that he had overlooked the quiet truth of what was. The subtle distortions in his reflection, he now understood, were not flaws in the bronze, nor in his eyes, but in his own relentless judgment, his own constant comparison to an imagined ideal, his own frantic seeking for something else when the truth was already there, waiting to be seen, waiting to be tasted, waiting to be simply experienced. The dust, as Aya had so gently suggested, was not on the bronze, nor on his eyes alone, but on the very expectation of what one thought one should taste or thought one should see. It was a veil woven from comparison and constant seeking, obscuring the simple, luminous truth of the present moment. And in that quiet, shared understanding of Yuki's transformation, Kai felt a subtle strengthening of the fragile peace that had begun to unfurl within him, a quiet recognition that he was not alone on this path of the unseen reflection, and that the path itself was not one of arduous seeking, but of gentle, unburdened presence. The fragile peace that had begun to unfurl within him, a quiet recognition that he was not alone on this path of the unseen reflection, and that the path itself was not one of arduous seeking, but of gentle, unburdened presence, lingered in the air around Kai. He carried this new understanding with him as the days drifted into soft evenings and the temple settled into its nightly hush. The insights gleaned from Yuki's journey had softened something within him, loosening the grip of his own frantic pursuit, allowing him to breathe a little more deeply, to observe a little more openly. Yet, even with this newfound spaciousness, a different kind of question began to stir within Kai, a quiet current beneath the surface of his thoughts. He would watch the last slivers of twilight fade from the high windows, painting the polished floors in hues of deep violet and gray, and a subtle sense of restlessness would accompany the falling darkness. The temple, usually a place of tranquil industry during the day, now became a sanctuary of profound quiet, where the sounds of rustling leaves outside and the distant murmur of the river seemed amplified. As the villagers outside the temple walls prepared for their nightly rest, their lanterns extinguished one by one, their homes sinking into shadow, Kai would often find himself standing by an open archway, gazing out at the sleeping valley. He imagined them, these families and solitary souls, nestled in their beds, their minds at peace, their bodies yielding to the deep embrace of slumber. He pictured the children, their dreams woven from innocence and wonder, and the elders, their sleep a gentle current of long-held memories. A quiet longing would echo in his own heart, a yearning for that same profound tranquility. His own dedication to the temple, his ceaseless focus on the bronze mirrors, his constant internal striving to understand the nature of his own perception, all of it felt, in these quiet moments, like a restless energy that kept him perpetually awake, perpetually seeking. He wondered if his very commitment, his unwavering sense of duty, was in some way preventing him from finding that deep, unburdened peace. Was his work, however noble, a thief of his own tranquility? Was the constant act of polishing, the continuous effort to refine, to improve, to understand, somehow pulling him further from the simple rest of being? He thought of the long hours he spent, the meticulous movements, the unwavering concentration. Even when he now polished with a slightly different awareness, a gentler touch, the act of polishing, the expectation of a perfect gleam, was still present. It was still a doing, a striving, a continuous engagement with an external task. And he wondered, In the hushed stillness of the temple night, if true peace required a cessation of all such doing, a complete surrender to stillness, a relinquishing of all duty. One evening, as Kai lingered by the archway, his gaze lost in the star-scattered sky, Aya appeared beside him. Her movements were, as always, so soft and unhurried that she seemed to materialize from the shadows themselves. She carried her simple broom, its straw bristles whispering against the polished stone floor as she came to a gentle halt. She did not speak, but merely stood beside him, her presence a calming anchor in the vastness of the night. The scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke clung faintly to her robes. Kai turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. There was a question in his gaze, a quiet searching that Aya seemed to read without effort. He felt no need to voice his thoughts. His inner inquiry, his subtle yearning for rest, seemed to be understood. Aya's gaze, soft and deep, drifted out towards the sleeping village, then back to Kai. Her voice, when it came, was a low murmur, like the rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze, gentle and inviting. "The village sleeps well," she observed, her words a quiet affirmation of his own thoughts. "Protected by the stillness of the night and by the watchful eyes of those who carry the burden of its waking." Kai nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied, his own voice hushed. "They find their rest, while others remain awake, vigilant in their duty." A subtle sigh escaped him, a quiet exhalation of his own restless questioning. Aya looked at him, her eyes holding a knowing compassion. "There was once a man named Tenzo," she began, her voice weaving a story into the fabric of the quiet night, "who served this very village for 30 long years. He was the night watchman, a sturdy man with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the very sky. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Tenzo would begin his rounds. He carried a heavy lantern that cast long, flickering shadows before him, and a stout staff that tapped a rhythmic cadence on the cobbled streets. His eyes, keen and perpetually scanning, would sweep across the darkened windows of the homes, searching for any flicker of danger, any hint of disturbance. Kai listened, his attention drawn fully into the narrative. He pictured Tenzo, a solitary figure under the vast, star-scattered sky, much like the image he had often painted in his own mind when he looked out at the sleeping valley. He could almost hear the steady thump-thump of Tenzo's staff, the soft rasp of his sandaled feet on the ancient stones, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle murmur of the river flowing by. Tenzo knew every alley, every doorway, every creaking gate in the village, Aya continued, her voice painting the scene with vivid strokes. He knew the patterns of the wind through the trees, the subtle shifts in the river's song, the hushed breathing of the sleeping world. He was the guardian of the villagers' repose, the silent protector of their dreams. He ensured that the merchants could sleep soundly, knowing their goods were safe. He ensured the mothers could rest, knowing their children were protected. He ensured the elders could find peace, knowing their homes were watched. Kai imagined Tenzo walking, hour after hour, through the cold, the rain, the moonlit stillness. He pictured the night watchman's sturdy form, his head held high, his senses acutely attuned to the subtle symphony of the sleeping village. It was a duty of immense responsibility, a commitment to the well-being of an entire community. Kai understood that kind of dedication, that deep sense of obligation to a craft, to a purpose. His own hands, calloused from years of polishing, were a testament to his own unwavering commitment. Yet, Aya's voice softened further, a wistful note entering its quiet rustle. As Tenzo walked, Night after night, a subtle envy began to grow in his heart. He saw the soft glow of the oil lamps in the windows, one by one extinguished, and he imagined the families inside, wrapped in the warmth of their blankets, their worries momentarily forgotten. He pictured their peaceful faces, their bodies surrendered to the deep currents of sleep. And Tenzo, who walked through the cold and the dark, felt a quiet ache within him. He longed for that same peace, that same untroubled rest. Kai felt a profound echo deep within his own being. He too watched the village sleep and felt that same subtle longing, that same ache for a peace that seemed to elude him. He too was dedicated to a duty, a craft that demanded his constant vigilance, his unwavering attention. He too felt the weight of his responsibilities, the subtle tension of his own seeking, preventing him from fully surrendering to a deeper, more profound stillness. He believed, Aya explained, her voice quiet but firm, that his duty, his 30 years of walking the night, had stolen his tranquility. He convinced himself that peace was a treasure reserved for those who could close their eyes and forget the world, a luxury denied to those who must constantly watch and guard. He yearned for the day he would retire, for the moment he could finally lay down his staff and his lantern, and at last find his own undisturbed sleep, his own elusive peace. The words struck Kai with a resonant truth. Tenzo believed his peace was external, something that would be granted to him after. A specific condition was met, after his retirement, after his duty was complete. This was so similar to Kai's own initial belief that clarity would come after he polished the mirror perfectly, or after he found the correct technique, or after he understood the precise nature of the flaw. It was always a future state, an external outcome, a reward for effort, rather than a quality to be cultivated in the present moment, within the very act itself. Kai felt a tightening in his chest, a familiar tension that spoke of his own internal struggle. He had dedicated himself wholly to his craft, to the temple, to the pursuit of clarity. Yet, like Tenzo, he sometimes felt that this very dedication, this constant striving, was a barrier to the inner calm he so deeply desired. He was trapped, it seemed, between his responsibilities as an apprentice, his inherent drive to seek and understand, and his yearning for a profound inner stillness that felt perpetually out of reach. He saw Tenzo, year after year, walking those same streets, guarding the same sleep, his heart growing heavier with the burden of what he felt he was missing. It was a profound and subtle form of suffering, born not from external hardship, but from an internal narrative, a belief that peace was separate from his present reality, always just beyond the horizon of his current duties. Tenzo was waiting for peace rather than finding it, and Kai, in that quiet, starlit moment, recognized his own reflection in the night watchman's longing. He too was waiting. He too was searching for a peace that felt forever deferred by the very nature of his path. Aya watched Kai, her knowing eyes seeing the subtle shifts in his expression, the quiet unfolding of his understanding. She knew the seeds of a new realization had been planted, a gentle turning of the soil within his heart. The story of Tenzo, the sturdy night watchman, had found its echo in the earnest seeker, the mirror polisher, both bound by duty, both yearning for a peace that felt just out of reach, both looking to a future external condition for a truth that perhaps lay closer than they imagined. The night deepened around them, silent and watchful, holding the unfolding of these quiet truths in its vast, encompassing embrace. The night deepened around them, silent and watchful, holding the unfolding of these quiet truths in its vast, encompassing embrace. Aya's soft voice returned, picking up the thread of Tenzo's journey, a story that now felt intimately woven with Kai's own internal landscape. Finally, the day came when Tenzo laid down his staff and his lantern for the very last time. 30 years of guarding the night, 30 years of watching over the village's slumber, had drawn to a close. He felt the weight lift from his shoulders, the immense burden of his duty receding like the last shadows of dawn. A quiet satisfaction settled within him, mingled with a profound sense of anticipation. At last, he thought, his own peace would come. At last, he would know the deep, undisturbed rest he had so long yearned for, the tranquility he had envied in the sleeping villagers. Kai pictured the scene vividly. Tenzo, his sturdy hands now empty, his keen eyes no longer scanning for danger, but searching instead for that elusive inner calm. He imagined the night watchman returning to his small, quiet home, a sense of quiet hope blooming in his chest. The bed, once a fleeting respite between long rounds, now beckoned as a sanctuary, a promise of endless, untroubled sleep. He prepared himself for bed. Aya continued, her voice soft as falling snow. With a deliberation born of 3 decades of anticipation, he smoothed his sleeping mat, adjusted his pillow, and lay down, closing his eyes. He waited for the embrace of sleep, for the deep currents of peace to carry him away. He waited, and he waited, but sleep did not come. The quiet of his small room, once a longed-for solace, now felt vast and empty. The stillness, once a dream, became a heavy blanket, suffocating rather than comforting. His body, accustomed to movement, to the rhythmic cadence of his rounds, felt restless and agitated. His mind, trained for constant vigilance, refused to quiet. He listened, but there was no distant murmur of the river, no gentle hoot of an owl, no subtle creak of a gate, only the insistent absence of his familiar world. Kai felt a chill trace down his spine. The irony was profound, a subtle twist of fate that spoke to the deepest corners of his own anxieties. Tenzo had given his life to guard the sleep of others, believing it would ultimately buy him his own peace. Yet, when the opportunity for that peace finally arrived, it eluded him precisely because his way of being had become so intrinsically linked to the very duty he resented. The absence of his burden did not bring freedom. It brought a new form of restlessness. He had sought peace in the outcome of his duty's end, not in the process of his living. Night after night, this pattern repeated, Aya explained, her voice carrying a note of quiet compassion. Tenzo would lie awake, his mind replaying the sounds of the village, the feel of the cool night air, the rhythm of his staff tapping on the stones. He missed the familiar weight of his lantern, the subtle shifts of the wind, the hushed breathing of the sleeping world that he had once guarded with such diligent care. The peace he had sought for so long, the peace he had believed was reserved for the sleeping, now seemed more distant than ever, a shimmering mirage that vanished the moment he tried to grasp it. It was a profound lesson, Kai realized, a quiet unfolding of truth. Just as he had sought clarity in the perfect static reflection of the mirror, believing it was an external state to be achieved through endless polishing, Tenzo had sought peace in the perfect static state of sleep, believing it was an external reward for his tireless work. Both had looked for the solution, outside, of the very act in which they were engaged. After many restless nights, Aya continued, her voice gaining a gentle, deliberate rhythm, Tenzo could bear it no longer. One evening, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the hills, he rose. He did not pick up his staff, nor his lantern. He simply opened his door and stepped out into the twilight. He began to walk, not as the night watchman, not as the guardian burdened by duty, but simply as Tenzo, a man taking a walk. He did not seek anything. He did not search for danger. He did not yearn for sleep. He simply walked, feeling the cool air on his face, the familiar cobblestones beneath his bare feet, the soft whisper of the breeze through the trees. Kai leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Aya, his breath held in quiet anticipation. This was the turning point, the subtle shift that he felt stirring within his own heart. And as he walked, Aya's voice deepened, imbued with a quiet wonder. Something began to change, without the obligation, without the pressure of a specific outcome. The act of walking transformed. His senses, once alert for danger, now open to the subtle beauty of the night. He noticed the soft glow of the moon, painting silver paths on the river. He heard the gentle chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmuring symphony of the sleeping valley. He felt the quiet presence of the temple, its ancient stones breathing softly under the vast sky. This was it, Kai thought. This was the unraveling of the knot, the clearing of the path. Tenzo had found peace not by stopping his work, but by changing his relationship to it. He had found peace not in the absence of activity, but in the presence within the activity itself. He was still walking the same streets, Aya explained, her voice like a gentle current, still passing the same sleeping homes. But now, he was not watching out of duty, but out of a quiet, unburdened awareness. He was not envying the sleep of others. He was, in his walking, becoming a quiet part of that very peace. He was still the guardian of their rest, but now, his own rest, his own tranquility, was woven into the very fabric of his movements. He found his peace not in sleeping, but in the walking itself, in simply being the quiet presence that allowed others to rest. The dust, Kai, was not on the path, but on the eyes that walked it. And once those eyes were cleaned of expectation, of resentment, of the desire for a separate outcome, the path itself became the peace. A profound stillness settled over Kai. The story of Tenzo, the night watchman, resonated with a deep, undeniable truth within him. He had been seeking his clarity, his true reflection, as something separate from his polishing, something to be found after the polishing was perfect. He had been waiting for the external mirror to finally show him a flawless image, rather than realizing that the clarity was a quality of his own seeing, a presence to be cultivated within the act of polishing itself. He understood now that his frantic efforts, his endless striving for an outcome, were like Tenzo's burden of duty. They prevented him from simply being with the act, from finding the inherent peace and clarity in the moment. He had been so focused on the result that he had missed the richness of the process. The next morning, Kai returned to his work in the temple, but something had subtly shifted within him. He picked up his polishing cloth, his movements still precise, but now infused with a new quiet awareness. He no longer polished with the desperate intensity of one trying to fix a flaw or achieve a perfect external state. Instead, he polished with a gentle, unhurried rhythm, feeling the smooth texture of the cloth against the cool bronze, noticing the subtle scent of the polishing compounds, the way the light danced on the surface as he worked. He focused on the act of polishing, on the slow, repetitive motion, on the feeling in his hands, on the subtle changes in the bronze beneath his touch. The mirror was no longer a judge of his imperfection, but a companion in his present moment. He watched the temple walls, the intricate carvings, the shifting dust motes reflect back at him, not with an analytical, critical eye, but with a quiet acceptance. He wasn't seeking a specific image, a flawless outcome. He was simply being with the polishing, being with the mirror, being with the reflection as it unfolded, moment by moment. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the hills, Kai began to walk, not with the heavy lantern of Tenzo, nor with the anxious searching of his past self. He simply walked the temple grounds, much as Tenzo had walked the village streets without obligation. He walked through the quiet courtyards, beneath the curving eaves, along the pathways that wound through the ancient pines. He felt the cool air on his skin, heard the distant murmur of the river, the soft rustle of leaves, the gentle creaking of the old temple wood. He was not looking for anything specific. He was not guarding against anything. He was simply walking. He allowed his senses to open, to take in the subtle symphony of the sleeping temple, the deep greens of the ancient trees melting into the twilight, the soft gray of moss-covered stone, the occasional flicker of an oil lamp in a distant window. He felt the cool smoothness of the polished stones beneath his feet, the gentle embrace of the soft breeze. And in this simple act of walking, without purpose, without expectation, a subtle peace began to bloom within him. It was not a peace that he had found after his duties or after he had achieved a certain state. It was a peace that arose from the very act of walking, from the quiet presence he brought to each step, to each breath, to each observation. He realized that the tranquility he had so desperately sought was not a separate destination, but a quality of the journey itself. It was not something to be acquired, but something to be uncovered, to be allowed to emerge from the spaciousness of his own mindful attention, the rhythm of his tasks. The simple act of doing, of being present with what was, became the very source of the calm he had yearned for. He was no longer waiting for peace. He was finding it, step by quiet step, in the gentle flow of his existence. The night deepened around him, silent and watchful, holding this newfound subtle peace in its vast, encompassing embrace. The night deepened around him, silent and watchful, holding this newfound subtle peace in its vast, encompassing embrace. Kai returned to his small room, the scent of pine and damp earth clinging faintly to his robes. He lay on his simple mat, and for the first time in a very long while, his mind was not racing. There was no frantic seeking, no anxious analysis of his reflection, no desperate yearning for a perfect outcome. There was only the soft hum of the crickets, the distant murmur of the river, and the quiet, steady rhythm of his own breath. He fell into a deep, untroubled sleep, a peace that felt not like an absence of thought, but a spaciousness around thought, a gentle stillness that cradled his very being. Days turned into weeks, and Kai continued his work with this new awareness. The polishing of the bronze mirrors, once a source of deep frustration, had transformed. It was no longer a battle against distortion, but a dance with light, a quiet communion with the material itself. He felt the cool smoothness of the bronze beneath his hand, the gentle friction of the cloth, the subtle shift as the surface responded to his touch. He observed the temple reflected in the mirrors, not with a critical eye, but with a quiet appreciation for the way light and shadow played across the ancient stones, for the way the intricate carvings seemed to breathe with the changing angle of the sun. He understood now that the clarity he sought was not a static image, but an unfolding presence, a quality of his own attention. Yet, even with this burgeoning peace, the human mind, ever curious, ever searching, would occasionally drift into deeper contemplation. Kai would sometimes sit in the temple courtyard, watching the river flow by, its surface a constantly shifting tapestry of ripples and reflections. The river, he knew, was ancient. Yet its waters were always new, always moving, never the same from one moment to the next. He would look at the great, dark stones of the temple, their surfaces weathered by countless seasons, their edges softened by time. Built to endure, yes, but even stone, he knew, would eventually yield to the relentless, gentle pressure of wind and water, crumbling back into the earth from which it came. He thought of the cedars in the temple grove, their roots gripping the soil for centuries, their branches reaching towards the sky like ancient guardians. They seemed immutable, eternal, yet even their needles would fall, their bark would age, and one day they too would return to the earth. Everything changed, everything flowed, everything, it seemed, was impermanent. And as he contemplated this ceaseless flow, this undeniable truth of change, a subtle question began to stir within him. If everything changed, if nothing truly lasted, then what was real? What could one hold on to? Was there anything that remained? Anything that could be called truly permanent, truly unwavering? His mind returned to his mirrors. In his past striving, he had longed for a reflection that would never distort, a true nature that would hold still, a clarity that would be absolute and unchanging. He had wanted to find something solid, something immutable, something that would defy the river's flow, the stones crumble, the trees' eventual return to earth. He had sought a permanence that would offer him a perfect, unchanging self, reflected back with unwavering certainty. Aya, as was her way, seemed to sense the subtle shift in Kai's contemplation. She often moved through the temple halls like a soft breath, her presence a quiet affirmation of the moment. One afternoon, as Kai sat near a window, watching the leaves drift from an old maple tree, she paused beside him, her broom resting against the wall. "The leaves fall," she murmured, her voice like the rustle of those very leaves. "And in their falling, they nourish the earth for new growth. A cycle, complete and unending." Kai nodded slowly, his gaze still on the drifting leaves. "Everything changes, Aya. Even the temple stones, in time, will become dust." Aya turned her kind eyes towards him, a gentle knowing in their depths. "Indeed. And yet, there are some who seek to defy this truth, to find something that will never change, never unravel, never cease to be." She paused, then continued, "Have you heard of Master Abe, the rope maker?" Kai shook his head. He knew of the temple's many artisans, the skilled hands that kept its ancient traditions alive, but the rope maker was not one he had encountered often. "Master Abe," Aya began, her voice taking on the cadence of a story, "was a man of prodigious skill. His hands were gnarled and strong, his fingers thick with years of coiling and twisting, weaving strands of hemp and silk into ropes of incredible strength and beauty. He crafted the ropes for the temple bells, the mooring lines for the riverboats, the intricate lacing for the warrior's armor. No one in the valley could match his artistry, his understanding of tension and weave." Aya's gaze softened, as if she were looking back through time, seeing the old master at his craft. But Master Abe harbored a secret ambition, a quiet obsession that consumed his waking hours and haunted his dreams. He was determined to tie the eternal knot. Not just any knot, you understand. Not a knot that was simply strong or beautiful or useful. No, he sought a knot that once tied could never, ever come undone. A knot that would symbolize unbreakable truth, enduring certainty, a permanence that defied all change. Kai listened intently, a familiar echo stirring within him, the desire for something that would never unravel, never distort, never blur. He understood this yearning, this deep-seated human wish for an absolute, an unchanging truth in a world of constant flux. He believed, Aya continued, her voice a soft current, that if he could only tie this eternal knot, he would hold within his hands the very essence of permanence. It would be proof, he thought, that some things, some truths, could indeed last forever, that they could resist the pull of time, the fraying of use, the inevitable unraveling that befell all other things. Aya described Master Abe's workshop, a quiet, dust-filled space redolent with the smell of hemp and beeswax. It was a place of intense focus where the rhythmic thwip of fibers being twisted and braided filled the air. Abe would sit for hours, sometimes days, surrounded by lengths of rope, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. His strong, calloused fingers, usually so nimble and efficient, would often tremble with the effort of his relentless pursuit. He would tie intricate knots, each one a marvel of complexity, and then, with equal fervor, he would test them, pulling with all his might, trying to unravel them, to find their weakness, to expose their impermanence. He tried every known knot, Aya explained, and invented countless new ones, knots with names like the Dragon's Embrace, and the Stone's Grip, and the Mountain's Hold. Each one, he hoped, would be the one. Each one, he believed, would be the embodiment of that unyielding, permanent truth he so desperately sought. He would pull and twist and strain, his face red with effort, convinced that if a knot could only withstand his strongest efforts, if it refused to yield, then it would truly be eternal. But always, eventually, the knots would give way. A subtle shift, a loosened strand, a slow, inevitable unraveling. The fibers, no matter how tightly woven, would begin to separate, to fray, to return to their individual strands. And with each unraveling, a fresh wave of disappointment would wash over Master Abe, deepening the lines of frustration around his mouth, adding a new layer of weariness to his already tired eyes. Kai felt a profound resonance with Master Abe's struggle. He remembered his own desperate polishing, his own fervent belief that if he could only apply enough effort, enough technique, he could force the mirror to yield a perfect, unchanging reflection. He had wanted his true nature to be an eternal knot, a solid, unmoving image that would never blur, never distort, never shift with the changing light. He had pulled and strained against the perceived imperfections in his reflection, just as Abe pulled and strained against the impermanence of his knots. He had believed, just like Master Abe, that the flaw was in the thing itself, in the mirror, in the knot, rather than in his own way of looking, of understanding. He had sought a static, external perfection, convinced that it held the key to an unshakable, internal truth. He would work through the night, Aya continued, her voice painting a vivid picture of the old master's relentless quest. The oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows of rope on the walls. His hands, though weary, would continue their intricate dance, seeking that one elusive pattern, that one perfect twist of fibers that would hold fast forever. He believed that the secret lay in a specific technique, a precise pressure, an exact number of turns. He believed that the eternal knot was a thing to be made, a structure to be achieved, a physical manifestation of an unchanging truth that, once grasped, would never slip away. And because he sought it as a thing to be made, a thing to be held, he found only frustration. The more he tried to force permanence, the more stubbornly it eluded him. The more he pulled against the nature of the rope, the more it seemed to resist his will, reminding him, with each unraveling, of the very impermanence he so desperately wished to overcome. Kai closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the image of Master Abe, his strong, gnarled hands meticulously working, his face etched with an almost desperate hope. He saw himself too, his own hands polishing the bronze, his own face reflected in the shimmering surface, a subtle blur of anxiety around his gaze. Both of them, in their own ways, had been striving against the natural flow of things, seeking to grasp and hold on to something unchanging in a world that was constantly, beautifully, subtly shifting. They had sought a permanence that was not there, not in the way they imagined it, not in the way they were desperately trying to create it. And in that striving, they had missed something essential. The answer, Kai felt, was not in the knot itself, but perhaps in the understanding of its very nature. And in that striving, they had missed something essential. The answer, Kai felt, was not in the knot itself, but perhaps in the understanding of its very nature. Aya paused, her gaze resting on a distant beam of light that pierced the temple's gloom, illuminating 1,000 dancing dust motes. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Master Abe continued his quest. Aya resumed, her voice a hushed whisper. For many more seasons. The lines on his face deepened, not just with age, but with the subtle etchings of relentless effort and the quiet weight of unfulfilled yearning. He grew weary, not of the craft itself, for he loved the feel of the fibers, the strength of a well-made rope, but weary of the pursuit of what seemed forever out of reach. He would sit in his workshop, surrounded by his tools, by the scent of hemp and beeswax, his strong hands, usually so purposeful, sometimes hanging limply by his sides, his eyes staring blankly at the intricate patterns of the ropes he had already made, ropes that were strong and useful, but never truly eternal in the way he imagined. His fingers, once so agile and full of hopeful vigor, now moved with a certain resignation, tying and untying, searching, always searching, for that elusive finality. He had mastered every known technique, innovated countless variations, pushed the very limits of what rope and knot could be. Yet, the answer remained hidden, not in a new technique, not in a secret twist, but somewhere beyond his grasping. He had sought to control permanence, to impose it upon the material world, and the material world, in its gentle wisdom, had simply refused to be controlled in such a way. It had always yielded, always softened, always returned to its original strands, a quiet testament to the ever-present flow of change. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across his workshop floor, Master Abe sat hunched over a length of newly spun hemp. His brow was furrowed, his eyes tired, fixed on the fibers as if willing them to reveal their deepest secret. He had just finished tying a knot he called the river's embrace, a knot of such elegant complexity that it seemed for a moment truly invincible. He pulled at it, gently at first, then with increasing force, his shoulders tensing, his face reddening with the familiar strain. And, as always, with a subtle shift, a barely perceptible loosening, the knot began its slow, inevitable unraveling. A sigh escaped his lips, heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical exertion, a weariness of the spirit. Just then, a small, soft sound broke the silence of the workshop. It was the gentle gurgle of a child, followed by a soft, rhythmic thwip-thwip. Master Abe looked up, his tired eyes slowly focusing. There, in a patch of sunlight near the open door, sat his young grandson, no more than 5 years old, completely absorbed in his own quiet play. The boy held a short length of simple, undyed twine, a piece too short for any serious purpose, a scrap left over from his grandfather's work. His small, nimble fingers, still soft and uncalloused, moved with an unburdened ease. He wasn't trying to tie a specific knot, nor was he attempting to create something lasting. He simply took the twine, twisted it into a random tangle, a momentary knot, a fleeting form, and then, with a happy, wordless sound, he would pull it apart again. A soft tug, and the fibers would release, returning to a straight line. Then, with a flicker of his tiny fingers, he would create another tangle, another momentary knot, only to untie it once more, over and over. And a dance of creation and release, entirely without purpose beyond the joy of the movement itself. There was no strain in the boy's face, no frustration in his eyes. There was only pure, unadulterated presence, a quiet delight in the simple act of tying and untying, of form appearing and dissolving. He was not seeking to hold on to the knot, nor was he disappointed when it came undone. He was simply in the process, moving with the twine, allowing it to be what it was in each fleeting moment. Master Abe watched him. He watched the soft, happy movements of the small hands. He watched the twine as it formed its brief, imperfect knots, and then gracefully, effortlessly, released itself back into a single strand. He watched the light catch the fibers, how they intertwined for a moment, held, and then separated. And as he watched, something deep within him, something he had held on to with such fierce intensity for so long, began, very slowly, to loosen its grip. It was not a sudden flash, not a blinding revelation, but a quiet, gentle unfolding, like the petals of a flower opening to the morning sun. He saw the truth, not in the intricate patterns of his own making, not in the endless striving for an unbreakable hold, but in the innocent, unburdened play of his grandson. The eternal knot, he realized, was not a single permanent structure that resisted all unraveling. It was, instead, the very dance of tying and untying. It was the endless possibility of connection and release, of form and dissolution, of appearing and disappearing. The truth was not in holding on to something forever, but in understanding that the essence of life, the essence of all things, was in this continuous, beautiful, impermanent flow. The joy was not in the knot that never came undone, but in the knot that could come undone, allowing for a new tying, a new connection, a new form. The permanence he had sought was not a static state, but the eternal rhythm of impermanence itself. The unchanging truth was that everything changes, and in that change, in that constant flux, lay the true, living essence of existence. The frustration, the weariness, the endless striving, all of it had come from his resistance to this fundamental truth, from his desperate clinging to an idea of permanence that simply did not exist in the way he had imagined. A soft sigh, entirely different from the earlier sigh of weariness, escaped Master Abe's lips. It was a sigh of release, of understanding, of a burden finally laid down. He looked at his own gnarled hands, no longer seeing them as instruments of endless striving, but as hands capable of participating in this beautiful, unending dance. He picked up a length of rope, not to tie an eternal knot, but simply to feel the fibers, to move with them, to tie a knot that was useful, strong for its purpose, and then, knowing that its time would come, to untie it again, without regret, without resistance. Aya's voice, soft and resonant, filled the quiet air of the temple. He understood then that the true master of the knot was not the one who could tie it forever, but the one who understood the freedom in its unraveling, the beauty in its becoming, and the peace in its letting go. Kai sat motionless, the story settling over him like a warm blanket. He felt a profound shift, a subtle but undeniable tremor deep within his own being. Master Abe's revelation, told through Aya's gentle voice, resonated with an aching familiarity. He had pursued his own eternal knot, his own perfect, unchanging reflection, with the same fervent desperation, the same relentless striving. He had wanted his true nature to be a fixed image, unblurring, unshifting, defying the very nature of light and shadow, of presence and absence, of all that made up the dynamic tapestry of the world. He remembered the hours spent polishing, the subtle blur in his reflection that had caused him such anguish, such quiet despair. He had seen it as a flaw, an imperfection that needed to be eradicated, polished away with greater effort, more refined technique. He had pulled and strained against the perceived distortion, just as Abe had pulled and strained against the impermanence of his knots, convinced that if he could only force the mirror to yield a static, absolute image, he would finally grasp his true, unchanging self. But what if the blur was not a flaw? What if the subtle shifting, the ephemeral quality of his reflection, was not a sign of imperfection, but the very essence of its truth? What if his true nature was not meant to be a fixed, unchanging image, but a dynamic, ever-becoming presence, flowing and shifting, just like the light on the mirrors, just like the strands of a rope tying and untying? The idea settled into him, cool and clear, like water finding its way to a thirsty root. He had been holding on so tightly, so desperately, to a static image of himself, of what he should be, of what his reflection should show. And in that clinging, he had created his own suffering, his own distortion. He had been so focused on resisting the unraveling, on preventing the change, that he had missed the beauty, the truth, in the dance itself. He thought of the temple mirrors he polished, how the light would shift throughout the day, how the reflections of the ancient carvings would subtly alter with the sun's journey across the sky. He had always seen these shifts as external variations, something separate from the mirror's intrinsic perfection. Now he began to see them differently. The changing nature of the reflections was not a flaw in the mirror, but the very essence of its capacity to reflect the dynamic nature of existence. The mirror was not meant to capture a static image of self, but to reflect the dynamic, ever-changing nature of the world and of the self within it. Freedom, he now understood, was not in tying the eternal knot, but in embracing the endless possibility of tying and untying. It was in letting go of the need for permanence, of the desire to grasp and hold on to a fixed image, a static truth. It was in understanding that the subtle blur, the shifting light, the ephemeral quality of his own reflection was not a problem to be solved, but a beautiful, living truth to be embraced. He closed his eyes again, and this time, when he pictured his own face in the polished bronze, the subtle distortion he had always perceived no longer filled him with anxiety. Instead, it seemed to whisper of life, of movement, of the gentle, unending flow that permeated all things. The suffering had not been in the mirror or in his reflection, but in his own resistance to the natural, beautiful impermanence that binds all things, that allows for new beginnings, new forms, new understandings, in an endless, quiet dance. The eternal knot, he realized, was not a thing to be achieved, but a way of seeing. The quiet understanding of the eternal knot, not as a static perfection, but as the ceaseless dance of tying and untying, settled deeply within Kai. It was a truth that resonated not just with his work with mirrors, or the image of Master Abe's gnarled hands, but with the very fabric of existence he was slowly learning to perceive. This new way of seeing, this acceptance of impermanence, began to ripple through all his thoughts, subtly altering his perspective on everything he encountered within the temple walls. He found himself drawn, almost unconsciously, to the temple's vast library, a place he had once frequented with a different kind of hunger. The library was a cavernous space, cool and dim, filled with the hushed reverence of countless generations of thought. Tall, dark wood shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, laden with scrolls, each one a tightly rolled testament to ancient wisdom, to human endeavor, to the relentless pursuit of understanding. The air here was heavy with the scent of aged paper, of dry ink, of the dust of centuries, a smell that was both comforting and, to Kai now, carried a subtle undertone of something unfulfilled. He walked slowly between the towering stacks, his sandaled feet making no sound on the polished stone floor. His fingers, calloused from the bronze, traced the spines of some of the older scrolls, feeling the delicate texture of the silk bindings, the faint crackle of the parchment within. He remembered his own younger days, spent immersed in these very texts. He had come here seeking answers, convinced that within these accumulated words, within the recorded thoughts of sages and scholars, lay the key to his own elusive clarity. He had believed, with a fervor akin to his polishing, that if he could just read enough, absorb enough, know enough, the distortion in his reflection, the uncertainty in his heart, would finally dissolve. He recalled sitting for hours, sometimes late into the night, poring over ancient commentaries on perception, on the nature of self, on the path to truth. He had diligently copied passages, memorized intricate philosophies, and debated complex theories with the older monks. His mind had been a vessel, eager to be filled, convinced that the more knowledge it contained, the more illuminated his being would become. But the experience had been much like trying to scoop water from a river with his cupped hands. The more he tried to grasp, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. Each new text he mastered, each new concept he absorbed, seemed only to reveal an even vaster expanse of what he did not know, a boundless ocean of ignorance stretching out endlessly before him. The more he read, the emptier he felt, a paradox that had once perplexed and frustrated him deeply. His mind, once so eager for the written word, had become burdened, heavy with facts, intricate theories, and endless distinctions, yet light on the very peace and clarity he had sought. He had chased a completeness that always eluded him, like trying to catch mist in his cupped hands, only to find himself more exhausted, more restless than when he had begun. The quiet frustration had been a constant companion, a dull ache behind his eyes, a restless stirring in his chest, mirroring the subtle despair he felt when he gazed into his own reflection. He had looked for wisdom, for peace, in the pages of scrolls, only to find them more distant than ever, buried beneath the weight of his own relentless seeking, his own incessant accumulation. Now, as he stood amidst the silent sentinels of wisdom, his new understanding of impermanence, of the beauty in letting go, cast a different light on these ancient texts. He saw them not as definitive answers, but as reflections themselves, as pointers, as transient forms that held truth only for a moment in a particular way of seeing. The truth was not in the scroll, but in the unfolding of understanding through the scroll, and then, perhaps, in the letting go of the scroll entirely. Aya appeared beside him, as if conjured from the shadows between the shelves. Her presence was as soft and unobtrusive as the falling dust motes in a beam of sunlight. She carried no broom today, her hands clasped gently before her. "You find yourself again among the quiet words," she murmured, her voice a low, rustling sound that seemed to blend with the stillness of the library. Kai turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "I remember a time when I believed all answers lay within these pages, Aya. I believed if I simply read enough, I would finally understand." Aya nodded, her her eyes deep and knowing, gazing past Kai to the endless rows of scrolls. Many believe this. They seek to fill themselves with the words of others, hoping to find their own voice. She paused, then continued. There was once a scroll keeper, long ago, in another temple library much like this. Her name was Juan. Kai listened, his attention drawn fully to Aya's gentle voice, knowing that another thread of wisdom was about to be woven into the tapestry of his understanding. Juan was a woman of extraordinary diligence, Aya began, her voice painting a picture in the quiet air. She dedicated her entire life to the temple library. From the first light of dawn until the last oil lamp flickered out, she would be among the scrolls. Her hands were always busy, cataloging, repairing, transcribing. Her eyes, though, were always busier. She read every scroll, every ancient text, every commentary that passed through her care. She believed with a fierce conviction that the path to true wisdom, to enlightenment itself, lay in the accumulation of knowledge. Kai pictured Juan, hunched over a low table, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp, her eyes red-rimmed from endless reading. He felt a pang of recognition, a deep empathy for this woman who mirrored his own past self, his own relentless striving for external answers. Juan read texts on logic, on ethics, on metaphysics, Aya continued. She devoured historical accounts, poetic verses, and the intricate philosophies of 1,000 schools of thought. She knew the exact location of every scroll, the lineage of every master, the meaning of every obscure symbol. Her mind was a vast reservoir, filled to the brim with the accumulated wisdom of generations. One might have thought her the wisest person in the land, so vast was her knowledge. Aya paused, her gaze resting on a particular section of scrolls, ones perhaps containing the very texts Juan might have studied. The silence in the library seemed to deepen, amplifying the quiet power of Aya's words. Yet, Aya said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, the more Juan read, the emptier she felt. Each new text she absorbed, each new layer of knowledge she painstakingly peeled back, seemed only to reveal an even greater expanse of what she did not know. The vastness of human thought, once a source of inspiration, became a crushing burden. She felt increasingly ignorant, increasingly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information she had yet to master, the countless truths she had yet to uncover. Kai shifted slightly, the description of Juan's internal world echoing his own past struggles with startling precision. He remembered that feeling of being perpetually behind, of chasing an elusive goal that seemed to recede further with every step taken towards it. Her mind, once eager and sharp, grew heavy, Aya explained, weighed down by facts, by theories, by the endless complexities of human understanding. She became restless, unable to find peace even amidst the profound silence of the library. She would read frantically, sometimes through the entire night, convinced that if she just found the right scroll, the right passage, the right piece of information, all her internal emptiness would finally be filled. She chased a completeness that always eluded her, like trying to catch the very silence that permeated the library in her cupped hands. The quiet frustration that had been Juan's constant companion, the dull ache behind her eyes, the restless stirring in her chest. Kai felt it all as if it were his own, a ghost of his former self. He had sought to fill himself, not with scrolls, but with an idea of a perfect, unchanging reflection, a static image of self that he believed held the key to his worth and peace. He had believed that if he could just know how to achieve that perfect reflection, if he could just master the technique, The external information would somehow resolve his internal puzzle. She looked at a scroll on wisdom, then another on peace. Aya continued, her voice soft and even. But peace felt more distant than ever, buried beneath the weight of her own relentless seeking, her own frantic accumulation. The more she tried to grasp wisdom through words, the more it seemed to slip through her fingers, leaving her with only the dry dust of knowledge, but no living water of understanding. Kai closed his eyes for a moment, letting Juan's story wash over him. He saw how he, too, had sought to fill himself with external information, whether it was the precise methods of polishing, the intricacies of light and reflection, or the philosophical texts of the temple. He had believed that knowledge alone would bring clarity, that if he could just know enough, he would finally see clearly. But like Juan, his relentless accumulation had only served to obscure the very thing he sought. He had confused knowledge with wisdom, information with understanding. He had believed that the path to internal peace lay in an external pursuit, in a frantic intellectual striving that ultimately drained him, leaving him feeling more burdened, more ignorant, and more distant from himself than ever before. The scrolls, like his mirrors, had become objects of desperate seeking, rather than gentle invitations to look within. The true clarity, he now understood, was not to be found in the endless pages of accumulated knowledge, just as it was not to be found in the frantic pursuit of a static, perfect reflection. It was not about filling oneself with more, but perhaps about creating space. It was not about acquiring more answers, but about letting go of the need to constantly know. The burden Juan carried was not the weight of the scrolls, but the weight of her own belief that truth was an external thing, something to be possessed, to be accumulated, to be mastered, rather than something that unfolds gently from within, when the mind is finally still enough to perceive it. He opened his eyes, looking at the scrolls not with a sense of dread or obligation, but with a quiet reverence for their existence, for the human journey they represented. They were not the destination, but simply a path, one among many, and a path that, if clung to too tightly, could itself become a hindrance. The wisdom, he sensed, was not in the words, but in the space between them, in the silence that allowed understanding to bloom. And the clarity he sought was not to be found in the frantic turning of pages, but in the quiet turning of his own gaze, inward. But wisdom is not found in accumulation, is it? Aya's voice was soft, a quiet question that hung in the air, gentle as a falling leaf. Juan learned this, though not in the way she expected. Not through another scroll, not through a new text, but through the sudden, unexpected arrival of change. Kai looked at Aya, his attention fully captured. The quiet reverence he felt for the scrolls now deepened by a sense of impending revelation. He waited, allowing the silence to prepare the ground for what was to come. One season, the rains came early and did not cease. Aya continued, her gaze distant, as if she were watching the scene unfold before her. Day after day, night after night, the sky wept. The river, which usually flowed with such a calm, slow majesty, swelled beyond its banks. It crept steadily through the valley, consuming fields, then homes, then the lower levels of the temple itself. The water rose, cold and indifferent, swirling through the corridors, claiming everything in its path. Kai imagined the scene vividly, the muted light filtering through the rain-streaked windows, the rising murmur of the water, the quiet panic, perhaps, of those around. He wondered what Juan would do, surrounded by her life's work, her precious scrolls. The temple began to evacuate, Aya explained. Monks and villagers hurried to carry what was most precious to higher ground. They rescued sacred relics, supplies of food, the temple bell, and Juan's colleagues, knowing her dedication, knowing her devotion, urged her to save her scrolls. They offered to help her carry the most ancient, the most revered texts, the ones she had spent her lifetime preserving. Kai could almost hear the frantic shouts, the splashing of water, the urgency in their voices. He imagined Juan standing amidst the rising tide, faced with the impossible task of choosing which pieces of accumulated wisdom to save from the encroaching oblivion. He knew the weight of such choices, the agonizing impossibility of trying to preserve something that was, by its very nature, meant to flow and change. But Juan did not move, Aya said, her voice a quiet, steady current, unwavering amidst the imagined chaos. She stood amidst the rising waters, the damp chill seeping into her bones, and she watched the water consume the lower shelves. She watched it darken the ancient paper, blur the intricate calligraphy, dissolve the very words she had dedicated her life to mastering. She saw scrolls begin to float, then drift, then slowly unravel into sodden, shapeless pulp. A profound stillness settled over Kai as he listened, a stillness that seemed to permeate the library around them. He could feel the weight of Juan's choice, the immense letting go it must have required. For a person who had defined herself by the accumulation and preservation of knowledge, to simply stand by and watch it all disappear, it was unfathomable. It was terrifying. It was, he sensed, the very essence of true wisdom. Her colleagues pleaded with her. Aya went on, her words almost a whisper now, imploring her to save something. Just one scroll, they begged, to carry the essence of the library to safety. But Juan, for the first time in her life, simply shook her head. She did not grab a single text. She did not try to rescue a single page. Instead, as the water rose around her, she found a high, dry ledge, and she sat down. She sat there, amidst the swirling currents, amidst the loss, amidst the complete and utter undoing of her life's work. She simply sat. The image of Juan, serene amidst the devastation, struck Kai with the force of a revelation. He saw her, not with despair on her face, but with a quiet peace, perhaps even a gentle smile. She had spent her life trying to hold on to wisdom, to capture it in words, to contain it in scrolls. And in that moment of ultimate letting go, she had found it. And as she sat, Aya continued, her voice now imbued with a quiet triumph. Watching the river reclaim the very knowledge she had so desperately accumulated, a profound stillness settled within her. A spaciousness opened where the frantic seeking had once resided. She realized, with a clarity that transcended any words in any scroll, that wisdom was not in the scrolls at all. It was not in the accumulation, the mastery, the possession of information. It was not something to be acquired, to be hoarded, to be defended against loss. Kai listened, his breath held, feeling the truth of Aya's words resonate deep within him. It was as if a missing piece of his own internal puzzle had suddenly clicked into place. Wisdom, Aya concluded, her soft voice carrying the weight of ages, was in knowing when to stop reading and start being. It was in the spaciousness created by letting go of the desperate need to constantly know, to constantly acquire. It was in the quiet understanding that the truth she had sought so frantically outside was always, always present within her, waiting only for her mind to become still enough to perceive it. A gentle silence followed Aya's words, deeper and more profound than any silence Kai had known in the library before. The air felt lighter, clearer. The scent of old paper and dust, once heavy with the weight of unread knowledge, now seemed to carry a delicate, almost ethereal quality, like the memory of a distant dream. Kai sat there, not moving, allowing the teaching of Juan's flood to wash over him, to cleanse the last vestiges of his own frantic intellectual striving. He had seen himself in Juan, in her relentless pursuit of knowledge, in her belief that more information would bring clarity. He had felt the burden she carried, the emptiness that grew with every new fact acquired. He had, like her, confused the map with the territory, the description with the experience. But now he understood. True wisdom was not accumulated, like coins in a merchant's pouch or scrolls on a scholar's shelf. It was unveiled, like a statue hidden beneath a dusty cloth, revealed only when the coverings were gently removed. It was not something one chased, but something one allowed to emerge from the spaciousness created by letting go, by simply being. He thought of his own mirrors, the perfect, gleaming surfaces. He had believed the clarity he sought lay in mastering the technique of polishing, in acquiring the knowledge of how to create the most flawless reflection. He had polished and polished, frantically, endlessly, trying to buff away a distortion he believed was external. But the distortion was not in the bronze, just as wisdom was not in the scrolls. It was in the agitation of his own mind, in the restless churning of his own thoughts, in the relentless pursuit of an external ideal that kept him from simply seeing what was already there. The lesson of Juan's flood was not just about scrolls. It was about everything. It was about his own reflections, about the taste of tea, about the peace of walking, about the permanence he had once sought. All of it had been an external chase, a frantic effort to acquire, to master, to know, when the answer lay in the simple act of letting go. He stood slowly, his movements unhurried, imbued with a new, quiet grace. The urgency that had once propelled him, the subtle anxiety that had been his constant companion, had begun to recede, replaced by a deep sense of calm, a spacious inner quiet. He felt the weight of the scrolls around him, not as a burden of knowledge yet to be acquired, but as a gentle reminder of the human journey, a testament to the myriad ways in which people sought to understand. He respected them, these ancient texts, but he no longer felt compelled to devour them. Their purpose, he now understood, was not to fill him, but to point him towards the emptiness, towards the space where true understanding could bloom. In the days that followed, Kai found himself drawn less and less to frantic study. He still performed his duties with diligence, still polished the mirrors until they gleamed with liquid light. But the quality of his attention had changed. The frantic intensity was gone, replaced by a quiet presence, a mindful awareness in each stroke, each breath. He began to spend more time in quiet contemplation, not actively seeking answers, but simply allowing himself to be. He would sit by the wide, slow river that wound through the valley, the same river that had swelled to claim Juan's scrolls. He would watch the water flow, ceaseless and unburdened, carrying all things downstream, without resistance, without attachment. He saw the leaves that drifted on its surface, the reflections of the sky, the subtle currents that swirled beneath. The river simply was. It did not try to know itself. It simply flowed. And as he watched, as he sat in the quietude of the riverbank, a deeper understanding began to unveil itself within him. He understood that true wisdom was not accumulated, like the river collecting pebbles on its bed. It was unveiled, like the clear sky emerging after a storm. It was a wisdom that emerged from stillness, from the spaciousness created by letting go of the constant need to know, to acquire, to grasp. He felt the gentle breeze on his skin, heard the distant murmur of the water, the soft rustle of leaves in the trees. He simply sat, present and open, allowing the world to reveal itself to him without judgment, without expectation. And in that spaciousness, in that quiet letting go, he began to feel a profound sense of peace, a clarity that was not of the mind alone, but of his whole being. The external search had finally quieted, and in its place, an inner knowing began to softly, gently bloom. In the quietude that now settled around Kai, a new kind of seeing began to emerge. It was not the frantic outward gaze that had once sought flaws in mirrors or answers in scrolls, but a gentle, internal awareness, a spaciousness that allowed the subtle currents of his own being to reveal themselves. With the frenetic striving quieted and the need to constantly acquire knowledge released, Kai found his perception shifting, turning inward with a newfound tenderness. He felt the soft hum of the temple's ancient stones, the gentle breath of the valley breeze, and the rhythmic beat of his own heart, all with a clarity he had never experienced before. Yet, even within this blossoming peace, a subtle, almost imperceptible thread of thought began to surface, like a delicate wisp of morning mist rising from the river. It was a feeling he had carried for a long time, unnoticed beneath the clamor of his earlier anxieties, but now, in the stillness, it became gently present. He noticed that despite his deep connection to the temple, to its ancient practices, and to the serene rhythm of its life, he often felt a subtle disconnection from the people around him. He was part of the community, certainly. He shared meals with the other apprentices, exchanged quiet greetings with the villagers who came to worship, and carried out his duties in harmony with the temple's flow. But there was a quiet reserve within him, a subtle distance he maintained, as if he stood on a bridge that spanned a chasm, reaching out towards others, yet never quite touching either shore. He had always been solitary in his work, focused on the perfection of the mirrors, absorbed in his own internal quest. Perhaps, he mused, his intense dedication, his relentless pursuit of an ideal clarity, had inadvertently created this very distance, this quiet isolation. He had built his own internal world, meticulously polished its surfaces, and in doing so, had perhaps forgotten to build pathways to the worlds of others. He would see the lively chatter of the younger apprentices as they gathered for their evening meal, their laughter echoing softly through the halls, and a faint, almost imperceptible pang would stir within him. It was not envy, but a quiet questioning. What was it that allowed them to connect so effortlessly, to weave their lives together with such apparent ease? Had his quest for inner purity, for a perfect, undistorted reflection, inadvertently led him to polish away the very threads that bound him to the larger tapestry of human experience? His thoughts drifted, like leaves on a slow-moving stream, to the various people he had encountered through Aya's stories. Yuki, the tea merchant's daughter, who had found connection not in the perfect brew, but in the simple act of tasting with presence. Tenzo, the night watchman, who had found peace not in solitude, but in the shared vulnerability of his nightly rounds. Master Abe, the rope maker, who discovered truth not in an eternal knot, but in the endless dance of tying and untying, the impermanence that bound all things. And Juan, the scroll keeper, who had found wisdom not in accumulation, but in the spaciousness of letting go. Each had found their way through a letting go of an external ideal and a turning towards a deeper, more present engagement with life. But what of connection itself? What of the bridges between hearts, between minds? As Kai sat contemplating these subtle stirrings, watching the dappled light filter through the temple's high windows, Aya appeared, her movements as soft and silent as a falling feather. She paused beside him, her broom leaning gently against a pillar, her kind eyes observing him with their usual profound understanding. She seemed to sense the unspoken question lingering in the air around him, the quiet yearning for a different kind of connection. "You have learned much of the stillness within," Aya murmured, her voice a soft rustle, "and of the wisdom that blooms when the mind releases its frantic grip. But the path of seeing is not just of the self alone, is it? It is also of the spaces between, of the ways we meet the world and each other." Kai nodded slowly, acknowledging her words, feeling their gentle resonance with his own thoughts. "I feel, at times," he confessed, his voice soft, almost a whisper, "as if I have been so focused on polishing my own mirror, on clearing my own vision, that I have forgotten how to truly connect with others. As if I have built a solitary path when the world is meant to be walked together." Aya smiled, a gentle knowing curve of her lips. "Ah," she said, her eyes twinkling with an ancient light. "This is a path many walk, Kai, the path of Chen, the bridge builder." Kai looked at her, his brow furrowed in quiet curiosity. He had heard of Chen, a legendary figure whose magnificent bridges spanned the widest rivers and deepest gorges, feats of engineering that were spoken of with reverence throughout the land. "Chen," Aya began, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller, inviting Kai to settle into the narrative, "was a master of his craft, perhaps the greatest bridge builder our valley has ever known. His hands were strong and calloused, his mind sharp and precise, capable of envisioning structures that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. He built bridges of stone and wood, of woven vine and sturdy plank, each one a testament to his skill and his unwavering dedication. Where there was a chasm, he saw a crossing. Where there was separation, he saw a way to bring together." Aya paused, her gaze drifting towards the distant mountains that framed the valley, as if seeing Chen's magnificent structures etched against the sky. He connected isolated villages, allowing traders to cross treacherous rivers, enabling families separated by impassable ravines to visit one another. His bridges fostered commerce, encouraged understanding, and brought prosperity to all who lived near them. People spoke of Chen as a weaver of communities, a unifier of lands, a man who literally bridged the gaps between people. Kai listened, picturing the grand arches of Chen's bridges, imagining the bustling life that flowed across them. Surely, a man who brought so much connection to the world must have felt profoundly connected himself. And yet, Aya continued, her voice dropping to a softer, more reflective tone, despite all the connections he forged in the outer world, Chen felt a profound and growing sense of isolation within his own heart. He would stand on his newly completed bridges, watching the joyous reunions, the lively exchanges, the thriving new markets that blossomed in their wake. He saw the happiness his work created, the communities he brought together, and a deep pride would swell within him. But then, as the day faded and the crowds dispersed, as the last traveler crossed and the bridge stood silent beneath the stars, a familiar emptiness would settle upon him. Kai felt a chill, a recognition that resonated deep within his own quiet heart. He knew that feeling, that subtle emptiness that could persist even amidst outward achievement. Chen believed, Aya explained, her gaze now fixed on Kai, that if he could just build one more bridge, one grander, more perfect structure, a bridge that would stand forever, defying all storms, connecting lands that had been separated for millennia, then, finally, he would feel truly connected. He believed that the flaw, the lack he felt within himself, must be a flaw in his current bridges, a subtle imperfection in their design, a structural weakness in their ability to truly bind. He thought that if the external connection was flawless, then his internal connection would also become whole. He sought perfection in his structures, Kai realized, just as I sought perfection in my mirrors. He believed the answer lay in the external object, in the mastery of his craft, in the flawless execution of his vision. He dedicated his life to this pursuit. Aya went on, her narrative painting a vivid picture of Chen's relentless striving. He would spend months, sometimes years, poring over designs, calculating stresses, seeking the strongest stone, the most resilient wood. He would supervise every detail of construction, his eyes sharp, his demands exacting, driven by an inner compulsion to create the ultimate bridge, the one that would finally fix him, that would finally make him feel part of the very communities he so expertly connected. The irony was stark, Kai saw. Chen was a master of connecting lands, of creating pathways between separate places, yet he could not bridge the chasm within himself, nor the subtle distance he felt from the very people who benefited from his work. He was a master of external connection, but a stranger to internal communion. He poured his entire being into these structures. Aya concluded for the moment, her voice soft, imbued with a quiet empathy for Chen's struggle, believing, with every fiber of his being, that the perfection of the bridge would somehow, magically, translate into the perfection of his own sense of belonging. But the more perfect his bridges became, the more celebrated his name, the deeper, somehow, the quiet chasm of his own isolation seemed to grow. Kai sat in silence, the story of Chen echoing profoundly within him. He saw Chen's powerful, skilled hands, building magnificent structures, yet unable to build the simple, intangible bridges of human connection for himself. He saw Chen's relentless pursuit of an external ideal, mirroring his own fervent polishing, his own intellectual striving, his own search for the eternal knot. He realized, with a clarity that settled deep into his bones, that his own pursuit of a perfectly clear reflection, his solitary dedication to his craft, and his quiet absorption in his internal journey had, in a way, made him like Chen. He had been so focused on perfecting his own reflection, on achieving his own clarity, that he had inadvertently built walls around himself, subtle barriers that kept him from truly engaging, truly connecting with the rich, imperfect, flowing world of others. The very pursuit of individual perfection had, paradoxically, led to a subtle, quiet disconnection. He had sought to clean his eyes, to find peace in walking, to embrace impermanence, to let go of knowledge. All profound internal shifts. But he had not yet fully considered the nature of the space between himself and others. He had not yet fully understood that true connection, like true seeing or true wisdom, might not be about building a perfect, unyielding structure, but about something far more fluid, far more vulnerable, and far more human. He understood now that his own sense of subtle isolation was not a flaw to be polished away, but a call to re-examine the very nature of what it meant to truly connect, not just with his own inner landscape, but with the shared landscape of humanity. He had not yet fully understood that true connection, like true seeing or true wisdom, might not be about building a perfect, unyielding structure, but about something far more fluid, far more vulnerable, and far more human. Aya watched Kai for a long moment, her eyes soft, discerning the shift in his awareness. She then resumed her story, her voice a quiet current in the still air of the temple courtyard. Chen, in his tireless pursuit of this ultimate bridge, this flawless structure that would finally grant him belonging, embarked on his grandest project yet. He chose a chasm wider and deeper than any he had ever spanned, a place where two remote mountain villages had been separated for generations, their people living in isolation, their traditions diverging, their shared history fading into distant memory. This would be his masterpiece, he believed, a testament to his skill, a symbol of unbreakable unity, a bridge that would stand as a monument to permanence and connection. Kai pictured the magnificent endeavor, the sheer scale of the undertaking, the immense effort, the meticulous planning. He imagined Chen, driven by that familiar inner ache, pouring every ounce of his being into this final, grand design. For years, Chen labored, Aya continued, her narrative unfolding with the quiet rhythm of falling rain. He oversaw the quarrying of massive stones, the felling of ancient timbers, the weaving of ropes thicker and stronger than any seen before. His reputation preceded him, and workers from across the valley flocked to assist, inspired by the vision, by the promise of a connection so profound. And slowly, painstakingly, the bridge began to rise, a majestic arc of stone and wood, stretching gracefully across the daunting chasm, a breathtaking sight against the backdrop of the rugged mountains. It was perfect, he thought, in every line, every joint, every meticulously placed stone. It was everything he had ever striven for, the embodiment of flawless connection. Kai felt a surge of admiration for Chen's dedication, for the sheer will to create such beauty and utility. Yet a subtle unease stirred within him, a premonition, knowing Aya's stories rarely ended with the simple triumph of external perfection. The day of its completion was a joyous celebration, Aya recounted, her voice painting the scene with gentle strokes. People gathered from both villages, their faces alight with wonder and anticipation. They walked across the bridge, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, marveling at its strength, its elegance, its ability to unite what had been divided. Chen stood at its center, watching the happy throngs, the tears of reunion, the renewed commerce, and for a fleeting moment he felt a profound satisfaction. He had done it. He had built the perfect bridge, the one that would last forever, the one that surely, finally, would fill the chasm within his own heart. Aya paused, her gaze resting on a distant, wispy cloud drifting slowly across the sky. The silence that followed was deep, expectant, but the valley, as you know, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper, is also a place of sudden, powerful storms. And that very night, as the celebrations wound down and the villages settled into a contented sleep, a tempest unlike any in living memory descended upon the mountains. The winds howled like hungry spirits, the rain fell in sheets, and the river, normally so calm and slow, swelled into a raging torrent, tearing at its banks, rising with a terrifying fury. Lightning illuminated the night in blinding flashes, revealing the bridge, standing resolute against the onslaught, yet buffeted by forces beyond human comprehension. Kai held his breath, imagining the scene, the raw power of nature unleashed. He pictured Chen, perhaps standing at his window, watching his masterpiece contend with the storm. His heart caught between pride and a growing dread. "By dawn," Aya continued, her voice imbued with the quiet sorrow of witnessing inevitable change. When the storm finally began to recede, leaving behind a world washed clean but utterly transformed, the bridge was gone. Not a single stone remained in its original place, not a single timber intact. The river, still swollen and violent, carried fragments of Chen's lifelong endeavor downstream, a scattered testament to the impermanence of even the grandest human creations. Where a magnificent bridge had once stood, there was now only the angry, churning chasm, wider and more daunting than before. A wave of sadness washed over Kai. He felt Chen's devastation, the crushing weight of shattered ambition, the profound sense of loss. All that effort, all that striving for perfection and permanence, reduced to scattered debris. It was a cruel echo of his own frantic polishing, his own pursuit of an unchanging reflection. Chen himself stood on the bank, Aya said, her voice gentle, his face streaked with rain and tears, his shoulders bowed, his spirit utterly broken. He had failed. His perfect bridge had not lasted. His lifelong quest for unbreakable connection had ended in utter ruin, leaving only a deeper chasm, both in the landscape and in his heart. He felt more isolated, more utterly disconnected than ever before. Kai could almost feel the cold, wet stone beneath Chen's hands, the despair in his gaze as he stared at the churning waters. It was the ultimate disappointment, the absolute failure of his external solution. But then, Aya said, and her voice lifted subtly like the first rays of dawn breaking through storm clouds. As the morning light slowly spread across the devastated valley, something remarkable began to happen. From both sides of the chasm, the villagers emerged. They were not weeping, not despairing, not blaming Chen. They were simply moving. They saw the broken bridge, the impassable gap, and they understood, without a word, what needed to be done. They began to gather what remained: sturdy ropes that had been used for hauling, planks of wood salvaged from collapsed sheds, even thick branches broken from resilient trees. Kai listened intently, a spark of curiosity replacing his earlier sadness. What could they do? The chasm was too wide, the river too fierce for a new bridge to be built quickly. They didn't try to rebuild the grand bridge, Aya explained, her voice now carrying a note of quiet wonder. They knew that would take months, even years. Instead, they began to work together, not with the precision of a master builder, but with the shared urgency of human need. A group on one side would throw a rope, and a group on the other would catch it, securing it to a sturdy tree or a large boulder. They would test its tautness, their hands rough with effort, their faces intent. Then another rope, and another. Soon, a network of ropes, imperfectly spaced, unevenly tensioned, began to stretch across the river. Kai pictured it, a fragile, temporary web, born of necessity and cooperation, utterly unlike Chen's monumental structures. And then, Aya continued, they began to lay planks across the ropes, tying them as best they could, creating a rudimentary, trembling pathway. It was not elegant, it was certainly not permanent, and it was far from perfect. It swayed in the lingering wind, it groaned underfoot, and it required immense care to traverse. It was, in every way, a vulnerable crossing, a testament to shared risk and mutual reliance. Kai imagined the villagers, helping each other, their hands clasped, their voices quiet with encouragement as they navigated this precarious path. The image was so different from the solitary figure of Chen, standing on his magnificent impersonal bridge. Chen, who had watched all of this unfold from his place of despair, slowly rose to his feet. Aya narrated, her voice now filled with a deep, resonant understanding. He saw his villagers, not helpless, not waiting for him to build them another perfect structure, but actively, imperfectly, courageously, building their own connection. He saw their faces, not in awe of a grand design, but etched with the shared effort, the mutual trust, the simple human act of reaching out. He saw them laughing even as someone stumbled, offering a steadying hand, sharing a joke about the makeshift nature of their path. Aya's gaze returned to Kai, her eyes holding the profound truth of the story. And in that moment, as he watched his people traverse that shaky, imperfect rope and plank bridge, Chen understood. He understood that true connection wasn't in the flawless, unyielding structure he had striven for, the one he had hoped would stand forever, defying all storms. It wasn't about building something so perfect that no one could ever be separated again. No, true connection, he realized, was in the shared vulnerability of traversing uncertain spaces together. It was in the reaching out, the holding on, the mutual effort, the simple human act of being there for one another when everything else had fallen apart. The connection was not in the bridge, but in the bridging. Kai felt a profound shift within him, a realization that settled deep into his bones, like a stone finding its rightful place in a riverbed. He had been so focused on polishing his own reflection, on achieving his own clarity, on understanding his own inner landscape. He had pursued a quiet, solitary path, believing that once he achieved individual perfection, then perhaps he would be ready to truly engage with the world. But Chen's story showed him the inverse. The very pursuit of that solitary perfection had paradoxically created a subtle, quiet chasm between himself and others. He thought of his frantic polishing, his intellectual striving, his quest for an eternal knot, his absorption in the flow of the river. All of these were internal shifts, ways of seeing and being within himself. But he had not truly considered the nature of the space between himself and others. He had not fully understood that true connection, like true seeing or true wisdom, might not be about building a perfect, unyielding structure, but about something far more fluid, far more vulnerable, and far more human. His own sense of subtle isolation was not a flaw to be polished away, but a call to re-examine the very nature of what it meant to truly connect, not just with his own inner landscape, but with the shared landscape of humanity. The revelation resonated with a quiet power. He had been like Chen, striving for an external, perfect form of connection, believing that if his own internal bridge was flawless, then he would naturally feel connected. But the lesson of the villagers, of their shared vulnerability and their collective effort across the broken chasm, spoke of a different kind of truth. Connection was not a destination, not a structure to be built, but an ongoing process, a continuous act of reaching and holding, of shared presence in the face of uncertainty. Kai began to approach his days, his tasks, and his interactions with a subtle but significant shift in awareness. He still polished the mirrors, his hands still moved with their accustomed grace and diligence, but the frantic intensity had softened. His gaze, once so intently focused inward or on the flawless surface of the bronze, now seemed to open outward to encompass more of the world around him. He began to engage with the other apprentices, not from a place of seeking answers, not trying to articulate his own unfolding insights, but from a place of open presence. He would pause during his work to offer a quiet smile to a young novice struggling with a heavy bucket of water, or nod in silent acknowledgement to an elder monk sweeping the courtyard. He no longer felt the need to retreat into his own thoughts when others were present. Instead, he allowed himself to simply be with them in the shared space of the temple. He found himself joining the other apprentices for their simple evening meal, not merely to eat, but to share the quiet rhythm of the common dining hall. He would listen to their chatter, their small worries, their simple jokes, not analyzing their words for deeper meaning, but simply allowing the sounds of their voices to wash over him, to connect him to the shared experience of their lives. He discovered that the warmth of a shared meal, the quiet clinking of bowls, the murmur of conversation, created a subtle, intangible bridge between them, far more profound than any grand structure. He began to visit the nearby village more often, not with a specific purpose or a particular person to observe, but simply to walk among the people. He would stop at the market stalls, not to purchase anything, but to exchange a few quiet words with a vendor, to admire the colorful cloths, to inhale the scent of fresh bread. He found that a simple nod, a shared glance, a moment of mutual recognition created a thread of connection, weaving him gently into the fabric of daily life. He noticed the small gestures of kindness between villagers, a mother helping a child tie a loose sandal, a neighbor offering a basket of freshly picked herbs, an old man sharing his bench with a weary traveler. These were not grand acts, not monumental structures, but small, everyday acts of reaching out, of shared humanity. And in these small acts, Kai saw the essence of Chen's ultimate realization. Connection wasn't about the perfect bridge that defied collapse. It was about the continuous, vulnerable act of building and rebuilding, of reaching and holding, of simply being present with one another in the uncertain flow of life. He realized that true connection bloomed not in grand structures or perfect understandings, but in shared moments of ordinary life, in the mutual experience of being human, with all its imperfections, its uncertainties, its fleeting joys, and its quiet sorrows. His own subtle isolation, he now understood, had been a wall he had inadvertently built around himself, not with stone and timber, but with his own relentless pursuit of solitary clarity. Now he began to dismantle it, not with grand gestures, but with quiet smiles, with open ears, with a simple, shared presence. The world, he found, was not a puzzle to be solved in isolation, but a song to be shared in harmony, a bridge to be walked together, one step at a time, across the beautiful, imperfect chasm of existence. As Kai's internal walls dissolved, replaced by a gentle openness, his perception, once so narrow and intensely focused, began to expand, much like a ripple spreading across a still pond. He had spent so long scrutinizing the surface of the bronze mirrors, searching for a singular, unblemished image of himself, or for some elusive flaw. But now, his gaze widened. He no longer saw just the mirror, or just the reflection, but the whole interplay of light and shadow that danced across the temple grounds. He noticed how the morning sun, slanting through the high windows of the main hall, cast long, dramatic shadows that stretched and shifted with the day's slow progress. These were not merely absences of light, he realized, but presences in themselves, defining and accentuating the forms they accompanied. The intricate carvings on a wooden beam, once seen only in their illuminated detail, now revealed a deeper character in the rich, velvety shadows that clung to their undersides. The smooth, polished floors, which he had always strived to make uniformly bright, now held pools of deep shade that gave the light a greater brilliance by contrast. He saw how the very act of illumination created shadow, and how shadow, in turn, revealed the true nature of the light. They were not separate entities, but two sides of the same unfolding reality, inextricably bound together. He had once sought to banish all shadows from his reflections, believing them to be distortions, imperfections to be polished away. But now, he saw their beauty, their necessity, their quiet truth. One afternoon, as Kai sat near the temple's central courtyard, watching the interplay of sunlight and the deep shade cast by an ancient pine, Aya approached him. She moved with her usual quiet grace, her broom a soft whisper against the stone. She paused, her gaze following his to the shifting patterns on the ground. "The temple breathes, does it not?" she murmured, her voice like the rustle of leaves. "With every shift of light, it shows a new face, a new depth." Kai nodded slowly. "I am only just beginning to truly see it," he replied, a sense of quiet wonder in his tone. "I used to think the shadows obscured the truth. Now I see they reveal it, in their own way." Aya smiled, a gentle crinkle around her kind eyes. "Ah, yes," she said, "a lesson many have sought to understand. There was once an artist, named May. She lived in a small, remote village nestled in the deepest part of the valley, where the mountains rose so high that the sun only touched the ground for a few precious hours each day." Kai listened, his attention drawn fully to Aya's soft voice, a familiar anticipation stirring within him. He knew her stories always held a mirror to his own journey. "May," Aya continued, "was a painter of uncommon talent, but her passion, her singular obsession, lay not in capturing the vibrant colors of the world, nor the clear forms of objects illuminated by the sun. No, May painted only shadows. She believed that the true essence of things, the hidden truths that lay beneath the superficial glitter of light, resided in the shadows they cast. For her, a shadow was not merely the absence of light, but a profound presence, a silent narrative of form and being." Kai pictured May in his mind, her studio filled with canvases of shifting darkness, her brushes meticulously rendering the subtle gradations of gray, the deep, inky blacks, the translucent blues that hinted at unseen depths. He could almost smell the oil paints, the earthy scent of her charcoal. May would spend countless hours observing the shadows, Aya narrated, her voice a soothing drone. She would watch the shadow of a single leaf as it danced on a sun-drenched wall, or the long, stretching shadow of a solitary traveler on a dusty road, or the deep, enveloping shadow cast by the ancient temple itself as twilight fell. She believed that in these ephemeral forms she could find a purity, a truth that the fully illuminated object often obscured. She sought to capture the very soul of a thing, revealed only when it turned its back to the light. But as Kai listened, a familiar echo of his own past began to resonate within him. May's intense focus, her singular pursuit, felt deeply familiar. And yet, despite her dedication, Aya continued, a deep frustration grew within May. She felt her paintings were incomplete, always missing something essential. She would finish a canvas, a masterpiece of intricate darkness, a profound study of shadow, and still, she would feel a subtle emptiness, a nagging sense that the truth she sought still eluded her. Her beautiful, intricate shadows, for all their depth and nuance, felt somehow unanchored. They were echoes without an original sound, reflections without a source. Kai understood this feeling intimately. Had he not felt the same emptiness when his perfectly polished mirrors still showed him a distorted reflection? Had his meticulous efforts to capture a flawless image of himself only left him feeling more adrift? She tried different techniques, Aya explained, different pigments, different brushes, but nothing seemed to resolve this persistent feeling of incompleteness. She would gaze at her finished works, beautiful in their own right, and yet a silent question would rise within her. What am I missing? What is the true shadow I am failing to capture? May's quest became more fervent. She believed there must be a secret, a master technique, a hidden understanding that would allow her to finally capture the true shadow, the complete and whole truth that she felt was just beyond her grasp. So, May began to travel, Aya said, her voice dropping to a contemplative murmur. She journeyed to distant lands, seeking out renowned masters of light and form, hoping they could teach her the secrets of the true shadow. She consulted ancient texts, deciphered forgotten theories of perception, and spent years in solitary meditation, all in pursuit of this elusive, perfect shadow. She believed that if she could just find the right teacher, or the right wisdom, or the right technique, she would finally be able to paint the whole truth, the unified essence she felt was missing from her work. As Aya spoke, Kai saw May's journey as a vivid reflection of his own path. He too had sought external solutions for an internal dilemma. He had polished the mirrors with increasing fervor, believing the flaw was in the bronze or in his technique. He had sought the perfect T, the eternal knot, the ultimate wisdom in scrolls, the flawless bridge. And now he saw May, seeking the true shadow, believing it could be isolated, captured, perfected, separate from its counterpart. He had focused so intently on the distortion in his reflection, on the shadow of uncertainty in his own gaze, that he had failed to see the whole. He had, like May, sought to understand one aspect of reality, his perceived flaw, without recognizing its inherent connection to everything else. He had isolated the problem, believing it could be solved in isolation, rather than embracing the unity of all things, the interplay of light and shadow that made up the complete picture. He understood now that his own past tendency to focus on one aspect of reality, to seek a separate truth in the reflection, rather than embracing the whole, had been the very source of his frustration. He had looked for a static, unwavering image of self, believing that any deviation, any blur, any shadow, was a flaw to be eradicated. He had failed to see that the reflection, like the world around him, was a dynamic dance, a constant interplay of what was seen and what was unseen, of light and shadow, of presence and absence. May's journey, her relentless pursuit of the true shadow, resonated with a deep, quiet understanding within Kai. He had been so intent on removing the shadow from his reflection, on achieving a singular, unblemished clarity, that he had missed the profound truth that the shadow itself was an integral part of the whole, giving definition and depth to the light. Without the shadow, the light would have no form, no meaning, no story to tell. He looked around the temple again, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow seemed to deepen, to speak to him in a new language. The quiet gloom of a distant corner, the bright sheen on a polished floor tile, the soft, diffused light filtering through a paper screen, all were part of a single, interconnected tapestry. He realized that the very distinction he had drawn between clear and distorted in his reflection was itself an artificial separation. His true reflection was not just the illuminated parts, but the shadows too. Not just the perceived perfection, but the subtle blurring, the uncertainty, the ever-changing nature of his own being. He had been seeking a true reflection, as if it were a static, singular entity, much like May had sought a true shadow. But perhaps, he pondered, true seeing was not about isolating one aspect and perfecting it, but about embracing the entire, dynamic, interconnected dance of light and shadow, of clarity and mystery, of presence and absence that made up the whole of existence. The truth, he began to understand, was not in the separation, but in the unity. Aya's voice, a quiet current, flowed into Kai's contemplation, carrying the conclusion of May's journey. May traveled for many years, searching for that elusive, perfect shadow. She sought it in the deepest caves, where light barely touched, and in the brightest deserts, where shadows stretched long and thin, sharp as blades. She interviewed hermits and scholars, spent time with cartographers who mapped the land's contours by the changing light, and even watched children play with their own dancing forms on sun-drenched paths. But the truth, as it often does, found May not in a distant land or an ancient text, but in a quiet, ordinary moment. She had returned to her own studio, weary from her travels, her brushes still untouched by the true shadow she so desperately sought. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long, dramatic forms across her workspace, May sat before her easel. She was not painting, she was simply watching. Her own shadow, long and slender, stretched across the floor, reaching towards the easel, until it merged with the easel's own dark form. And in that simple, unforced moment, something shifted within her. She saw, with a clarity that had eluded her for decades, that the shadow was not a separate entity, something to be captured in isolation. It was born of the light, defined by the light, utterly dependent on the light. The easel's shadow existed only because the easel stood in the light. Her own shadow was a fleeting companion to her form, inseparable from her presence in the light. The true shadow was not a thing to be found or painted alone, but a relationship, a dance between light and form, between presence and absence. The truth was in their unity, not in their separation. May realized that her relentless pursuit of shadow, apart from light, had been like trying to capture the silence of a bell without ever hearing its ring. The silence was defined by the ring, the shadow by the light. When she tried to paint only the shadow, she was always missing the very thing that gave it meaning. Her paintings had felt incomplete because they were incomplete. They lacked the unspoken presence of their luminous origin. She had been seeking unity by creating greater separation. As Aya spoke, Kai felt the truth of May's realization ripple through his own being. He thought of his distorted reflection, the shadow of uncertainty that had troubled him for so long. He had tried to polish away that shadow, to isolate and remove the perceived flaw, believing that a perfect reflection meant an absence of any blur, any darkness. But he understood now that the subtle blurring, the perceived distortion, the very shadows in his own gaze, were not flaws to be eradicated. They were part of the unified tapestry of his own seeing, giving depth and nuance to what was clear, defining the very clarity he sought. His own thoughts and feelings, once seen as separate entities, the clear and the confused, the calm and the restless, now seemed to merge, like May's shadow with her easels. The anxieties he had tried to suppress, the questions he had tried to answer with frantic searching, were not external problems to be solved, but internal movements, the ever-shifting play of light and shadow within his own consciousness. To deny them, to try and eliminate one part in favor of another, was to deny the wholeness of his own experience. He saw how his past efforts to achieve a singular, perfect image of himself had been precisely what kept him from seeing his true nature. His true nature was not a static, unblemished ideal, but the dynamic, breathing, ever-changing interplay of all his parts, the light of his awareness, the shadow of his doubts, the form of his physical presence, the subtle distortions of his perception. All were interconnected, all were part of the whole. The clarity he had sought was not an absence of shadow, but an understanding of its inherent relationship to light. It was an embracing of the full spectrum of his being, not a selective acceptance. This understanding settled within Kai, a quiet, profound peace. He felt a softening, a loosening of the rigid boundaries he had unconsciously drawn within himself. The world outside, the temple walls, the river flowing by, the very air he breathed, all seemed to resonate with this newfound unity. There was no longer a need to separate, to judge, to fix. There was only the quiet acceptance of what was in its entirety, in its beautiful, imperfect, dynamic dance of light and shadow. And with this softening, a new question began to stir within Kai, gently rising from the depths of his awakened understanding. If all was unity, if clarity came from embracing the whole, what then of giving and receiving? What of the ways one interacted with the world, with others, with oneself? He had spent so much of his life striving, seeking, trying to acquire understanding, to achieve perfection. Was this striving a form of giving, or was it a form of taking? And if it was a form of taking, what did it truly take from? He had always believed that to give, one must work hard, one must sacrifice, one must deplete oneself for the benefit of others. Had he not, in his younger, more fervent days, denied himself rest, denied himself simple pleasures, all in the pursuit of becoming a perfect apprentice, believing this self-deprivation was a form of dedication, a way of giving his best to the temple? He recalled the echoes of Tenzo, the night watchman, and his own initial struggles with duty and peace. He remembered the feeling of depletion, the quiet ache behind his eyes, the restless stirring in his chest. Aya, as if sensing the subtle shift in Kai's internal landscape, moved silently to his side. She carried a small, empty wooden bowl in one hand, its surface smooth and worn, and a small overflowing cup in the other, from which a few drops of water gently spilled onto the stone floor. She held them before him, not speaking, simply allowing the image to resonate. Kai looked at the empty bowl, then at the overflowing cup. He understood. The empty bowl could only receive. The overflowing cup, in its very abundance, naturally gave. True giving, he began to intuit, did not come from an empty, self-sacrificing place, but from a wellspring of fullness. Aya's soft voice then began to weave a new story, a tale that would illuminate this burgeoning understanding. There was once a village, nestled in a valley much like this one, she began, her gaze as gentle as the morning mist. And for many seasons, the rains did not come. The earth cracked, the river dwindled to a trickle, and the crops withered in the fields. The people grew thin, their faces etched with worry, their voices hushed with fear. In this village lived a woman named Sarah, known as the Drought Keeper. It was not a formal title, but one she earned through her unwavering dedication to preserving the precious remaining water. Sarah was a small woman, but her spirit was immense. Her face was already drawn with worry, her movements hesitant as she measured out the meager rations for her family, then for her neighbors. She denied herself first, always, believing that by taking less for herself, there would be more for others. She would pour a small measure for her child, then an even smaller measure for her aging parents, and then, only if there was a drop left, a tiny sip for herself. Kai could almost see Sarah, her gaunt frame moving through the parched village, her eyes, once bright, now shadowed with constant anxiety, her hands trembling slightly as she held the precious ceramic bowls. He imagined the taste of dust on her tongue, the parched feeling in her throat, the constant, gnawing hunger in her belly. She was a figure of profound self-sacrifice, a living testament to the human desire to protect and provide, even at one's own expense. Sarah believed that her own thirst, her own hunger, was a small price to pay if it meant another could have a little more. Aya continued, her voice soft, almost a whisper, yet carrying the weight of the story. She would rise before dawn, moving quietly through her home, ensuring every drop of collected dew was carefully stored. She would spend her days tending to the desperate plants, offering them her own small allowances of water, hoping to coax life from the dying earth. She gave away her own food, her own comforts, her own strength, believing that this was the path of true compassion, the essence of selflessness. But as the drought lengthened, so too did the drought within Sarah. Her body grew weak, her movements became slower, more labored. Her voice, once clear, became raspy and dry. Her eyes, though still filled with a profound love for her village, began to lose their sparkle, dimmed by constant deprivation. She became so focused on measuring, on saving, on denying herself, that she forgot the simple act of receiving. She gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left of her own wellspring. She became a vessel that was constantly emptied, never refilled, convinced that her own emptiness was the ultimate form of giving. Kai listened, his heart aching with recognition. He had known that feeling of self-deprivation, that quiet martyrdom, that belief that to truly dedicate oneself meant to deny oneself. He remembered the relentless drive to polish, the hours spent in the library, the constant striving for an external perfection that he believed would somehow make him worthy, somehow make him complete, somehow allow him to contribute truly to the temple and to the world. He saw Sarah denying herself water, and he saw himself denying himself rest, denying himself the simple joy of an unburdened mind, denying himself the quiet acceptance of his own imperfect, yet whole, reflection. He had believed that only through rigorous self-discipline, through pushing past his own limits, could he achieve the clarity he so desperately sought. He had, in a way, created a drought within himself, a parched landscape of constant seeking and subtle self-punishment, all in the name of a perceived higher purpose. He realized now the subtle violence of that approach. True dedication, true giving, he began to understand, could not spring from a place of depletion. A dry well could not quench a thirst. A parched spirit could not truly offer sustenance. Sarah, in her noble self-sacrifice, had become so empty that her ability to truly sustain others was diminishing, even as her intention remained pure. Her generosity, born of profound love, was ironically being undermined by her own internal drought. Aya's voice, a gentle current, continued. One day, a traveling merchant passed through the village. He saw Sarah, frail and weary, yet still trying to give water to a dying sapling. He recognized the profound love in her actions, but also the deep exhaustion in her eyes. He offered her a small pouch of dried fruits and a full wineskin of water, not as a reward, but as a simple act of human connection. Sarah hesitated, her ingrained habit of denial rising to the surface. She began to refuse, to say no, save it for someone else, someone who needs it more. But the merchant, seeing her true need, insisted gently. He said, "One cannot pour from an empty cup, Sarah. To truly give, one must first be full." With great reluctance, Sarah finally allowed herself to drink, to eat, and in that moment, as the water coursed through her parched throat, as the sweetness of the fruit touched her tongue, she felt a flicker of life return to her. She realized, with a quiet shock, that her self-deprivation had not made her a better giver, but a more depleted one. Her generosity had become tinged with her own suffering, and as she slowly began to nourish herself again, allowing herself to receive, she found a new strength, a deeper, more vibrant wellspring of compassion within her. Kai felt the profound truth of these words. One cannot pour from an empty cup. The phrase resonated deep within his bones. His own relentless striving, his frantic polishing, his intellectual searching, his pursuit of an external perfection had often left him feeling hollow, drained. He had believed that by emptying himself, by denying his own needs for rest, for simple presence, for acceptance of his own being, he was somehow making space for truth, for clarity. But now he understood. The clarity he sought, the wisdom he yearned for, the peace he longed to share, could only flow from a place of internal abundance, from a spirit that was well-nourished and whole. Generosity, whether of spirit or of substance, was not about sacrificing until one was empty, but about cultivating a fullness within oneself that naturally overflowed into the world. He thought of his own reflection again. The perceived distortions, the shadows, were not to be denied or removed, but integrated into the whole. To deny a part of himself was to create an internal drought, to deplete the very wellspring from which true seeing, true understanding, true generosity could flow. To be truly present, truly clear, truly generous, meant to accept and nourish the whole of himself, to fill his own cup, so that its overflow could genuinely touch and benefit others. The path to clarity, he realized, was not through self-deprivation, but through self-compassion, through the quiet, nourishing act of being wholly and completely present to himself, in all his light and all his shadow. From that fullness, everything else could gracefully flow. Kai sat for a long time, absorbing the quiet wisdom that had just unfolded. The image of Sarah, no longer parched but slowly replenishing her own wellspring, remained vivid in his mind. He understood that true giving, true service, true presence could only truly blossom from a place of inner abundance. To strive from emptiness was to perpetuate a drought, not to create a fertile ground for growth. His gaze drifted to the window, where the first hint of autumn painted the distant trees in subtle hues of gold and rust. The seasons were shifting, not with a sudden dramatic flourish, but with a gentle, almost imperceptible grace, each day a fraction cooler, each leaf a shade deeper. He thought of Taku, the season keeper, whose story Aya had shared only briefly, yet whose struggle now spoke to the very core of Kai's integrated understanding. Taku, the temple's revered season keeper, had once believed that the precise marking of time, the meticulous observation of celestial alignments, and the careful consultation of ancient almanacs were essential to understanding the world. His brow was perpetually furrowed with the weight of this responsibility, his hands often stained with the ink of his meticulous records. He sought to impose order on the fluid chaos of nature, to predict, to label, to categorize every shift in the wind, every drop of rain, every moment of blossom and decay. He lived by the calendar, by the clock, by the ancient wisdom inscribed in his scrolls, convinced that within their pages lay the immutable patterns of existence. But as the years passed, Taku grew increasingly anxious. The seasons, in their infinite wisdom, rarely adhered perfectly to his precise measurements. A spring might arrive early, a winter linger too long, a summer drought might defy his predictions. He would spend restless nights poring over his texts, searching for an explanation, for a way to force the world into the neat boxes of his understanding. He saw these deviations not as the natural flow of life, but as failures, either of his own understanding or of nature itself to conform. He became a prisoner of his own systems, unable to simply be with the unfolding moment, unable to trust the inherent intelligence of the earth. He longed for certainty, for the comfort of knowing what was to come, for the reassurance that everything had its proper place and time. But the more he sought to define, the more elusive the essence of the seasons became. He was so busy measuring the passage of time, he forgot to feel it. He was so focused on the idea of spring, he missed the actual, vibrant green shoot pushing through the earth right before his eyes. He was so consumed with the calendar, he became deaf to the whisper of the wind, blind to the subtle shift in the light, numb to the gentle touch of changing air. Aya had told Kai that Taku's release came not from finding a more accurate almanac, but from a simple, quiet observation. One day, he watched a group of village children playing in a field. They were not consulting calendars or predicting the weather. They simply ran barefoot through the damp grass, laughed as the first autumn leaves drifted down, and shivered with delight as a sudden, unexpected shower cooled their faces. They sensed the seasons through their skin, their breath, their joy, their direct, unmediated experience. They lived with the seasons, not above them. And in that moment, Taku saw his own folly. He realized that nature didn't follow human calendars. Human calendars were merely an attempt to describe nature, an imperfect map, not the territory itself. The rigid marking, the desperate attempt to impose order, had prevented him from sensing the subtle shifts, from truly experiencing the vibrant, ever-changing dance of life. He had been so busy knowing the seasons, he had forgotten how to be in them. He understood that wisdom wasn't in predicting the future or clinging to the past, but in the quiet, open-hearted embrace of the present, in trusting the inherent intelligence of life to unfold as it would. This final lesson from Taku resonated through Kai with a clarity that settled deep into his bones. It was the last piece of the puzzle, illuminating all that had come before. He saw now that his frantic polishing, his desperate search for a perfect, unchanging reflection, had been his own attempt to impose a rigid order on the fluid reality of his own being. He had been like Taku, trying to fit the dynamic, ever-shifting truth of himself into a static image, a fixed definition. He remembered Aya's first words so long ago. "You polish the mirror, but forget to clean the eyes that look. The dust is not on the bronze, but on your seeing itself." That was the beginning, the fundamental shift from external to internal. He had learned that true seeing was about presence, about letting go of judgment, like Yuki learning to simply taste the tea, not just analyze it. He had discovered peace not in a destination, but in the journey itself, in the rhythmic walking and doing, like Tenzo finding tranquility in his rounds. He had embraced the truth of impermanence, understanding that life, like Master Abe's eternal knot, was an endless dance of tying and untying, of becoming and unbecoming. He had learned that true wisdom was not accumulated knowledge, but the spaciousness created by letting go, by knowing when to stop reading and simply be, just as Juan had done amidst the flood. He had found connection not in perfect structures or grand understandings, but in the shared vulnerability of ordinary moments, like the villagers bridging the chasm together. He had seen that truth lay not in separate parts, like May's shadows, but in the unity of all things, in the interplay of light and dark, clear and distorted. And he had understood that true generosity, true compassion, flowed from a place of fullness, from a wellspring that was nourished and whole, as Sarah had discovered. Finally, he had learned that clarity didn't need to bounce back as an echo, but was found in the direct, unmediated experience of the present moment, in simply sensing, feeling, and being, without relying on external calendars or predictions. All these paths, all these stories, converged into a single, profound understanding. There was no separation. The clarity he sought was not hidden in the outer world, nor was it a destination to be reached. It was the very act of looking, of tasting, of walking, of being, of connecting, of accepting, of nourishing, of sensing, of living, all integrated into the gentle flow of existence. Kai rose from his contemplation, his movements now fluid and unhurried, imbued with a quiet grace he had never known before. His shoulders, once tensed with unspoken anxiety, were relaxed. His hands, still calloused from years of polishing, moved with a newfound lightness. And his eyes, those once troubled eyes, now held a deep, expansive clarity. They saw not just with physical sight, but with the whole of his awakened being, encompassing the light, the shadow, the clear, the blurred, the transient, the eternal, all as part of a seamless, beautiful whole. He walked to the polishing room. The familiar scent of bronze and polishing compounds, now a comforting embrace, not a reminder of his past frustrations. He picked up his soft cloth, his movements precise yet effortless, and approached one of the large bronze mirrors. Golden afternoon light streamed into the temple hall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, just as it had on the very first day. He began to polish. The rhythmic shh of the cloth against the bronze was no longer a frantic pursuit of perfection, but a meditative dance, a quiet offering. He polished not to fix a flaw, but to honor the inherent brilliance already present. He polished not to erase distortion, but to celebrate the mirror's capacity to reflect all things in all their changing forms. When he finally looked into the mirror, there was no longer a flicker of anxiety, no shadow of uncertainty. His reflection was clear, undistorted, not because the mirror had changed, but because his eyes and his heart had. He saw the subtle lines around his eyes, the slight curve of his lips, the quiet peace in his gaze. He saw the light that touched his face and the soft shadows that defined its contours. He saw himself not as a static image to be judged, but as a living, breathing, ever-changing part of the vast tapestry of existence. He understood now. The unseen reflection was not a hidden image of a perfect self waiting to be revealed. It was the process of seeing itself, the boundless capacity of awareness, the gentle, unmediated presence that embraced all that arose without judgment or striving. It was the recognition that clarity wasn't about erasing imperfections, but about integrating them into the vibrant, interconnected dance of life. Kai knew he would continue to polish mirrors, but his craft had transformed from a burden into a joyous expression of presence. He would continue to walk, to taste, to learn, to connect, to give, to simply be. His journey had led him not to an end, but to a quiet, profound beginning, a new way of living in harmony with the gentle flow of existence. The greatest truth, he had found, was not in seeking, but in simply seeing, with eyes unclouded by dust and a heart open to all that is. He had at last cleaned the eyes that look, and in doing so had found the unseen reflection of his own true nature, shimmering in the quiet depths of the present moment. The temple now rests in profound stillness. The bronze mirrors reflect only the soft darkness of night, holding within their surfaces the quiet truth that Kai discovered. That clarity was never about perfect reflections, but about the eyes that see. As you drift deeper into your own restful journey, know that like Kai, you need not polish away any part of yourself. The shadows and the light, the clear and the blurred, all belong to the beautiful wholeness of who you are. Let your breath become as gentle as Aya's footsteps, as steady as the river's flow. Release any remaining tension in your shoulders, your jaw, your thoughts. There is nothing you need to fix, no perfect image you need to achieve. You are already whole, already complete, already enough. The stories of the temple, of mirrors and tea, of bridges and knots, of shadows and seasons, now settle like soft dust in the quiet corners of your mind, becoming part of your own peaceful dreams. Rest now, dear traveler. Let sleep embrace you as gently as the valley embraces its ancient temple, and know that when morning comes, you will see with eyes refreshed, with a heart at peace, with the quiet understanding that the truest reflection has always been the simple, beautiful act of being exactly who you are. Sleep well, rest deeply, and dream in the soft, encompassing peace of this gentle January night. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Sweet dreams.